My brother called me at 5 in the morning to tell me our mother was dead and that he had inherited everything, but he did not know that Mom was sitting right across from me at the kitchen table dipping a buttered biscuit into her tea. My name is Booker Ross. I am 73 years old and I spent 40 years as a structural engineer building bridges that could withstand hurricanes and earthquakes. I know how to spot a hairline fracture in concrete before the whole thing comes crashing down. But nothing I ever studied in physics prepared me for the structural failure of my own bloodline. The crack in the foundation was my younger brother Kelvin. He has always been the type of man who would pray for rain just so he could sell you an umbrella he stole from your porch. It was Tuesday morning in Atlanta. The sun had not even broken the horizon yet. The house was quiet, filled with that heavy silence that only exists before the world wakes up. I was already awake because old men do not sleep much, and I was making a pot of Earl Grey tea. My mother, Mama Lucinda, was sitting in her usual spot by the window. At 94 years old, she moved a little slower, but her mind was as sharp as a fresh razor blade. She was humming an old gospel tune, waiting for her breakfast. Then the phone rang. It was not a normal ring. It sounded like an alarm. I looked at the caller ID and saw the name Kelvin flashing. My stomach tightened. My brother never called at 5 in the morning unless he was in trouble or he needed money, which for Kelvin were usually the same thing. I picked up the phone and pressed it to my ear, keeping my voice low so I would not disturb the peace of the morning. "Hello," I said. "Booker." His voice was a performance. I could hear the forced tremble in it, the way he was trying to sound like a man broken by grief. It was the same tone he used when he was 10 years old and broke Mrs. Johnson's window, trying to convince our father it was an accident. "Booker, it is Mom. She is gone." I stood there holding the phone, looking directly at my mother. She was chewing a piece of biscuit, looking out at the bird feeder in the backyard. She looked very much alive. In fact, she looked better than she had in years. "What do you mean she is gone, Kelvin?" I asked, my voice flat. I wanted to see how far he would take this. "She died last night, Booker. It was a massive stroke. It happened so fast. I found her in the kitchen in Chicago. She was cold by the time I got to her. The paramedics said she did not suffer." I watched Mama Lucinda take a sip of tea. The steam curled up around her silver hair. She felt my eyes on her and looked up, raising an eyebrow as if to ask who was on the phone. I just held up a hand, signaling her to wait. "I am so sorry," Booker Kelvin continued, and I could hear him blowing his nose. It sounded wet and dramatic. "I know you haven't seen her in a long time, but I was there." I held her hand until they took her away. He was lying. He was lying about everything. He was lying about the stroke. He was lying about holding her hand. But the biggest lie was that I had not seen her. Kelvin thought Mama was still living in that old brick house on the south side of Chicago. He thought she was there alone, vulnerable, waiting to die. He did not know that 8 months ago I drove up there in my truck and took her out of that house. I took her because when I arrived unannounced, I found her refrigerator empty except for a jar of expired mayonnaise and a molded lemon. I found bills piled up on the counter, bills Kelvin was supposed to be paying with her pension checks. I found my mother, the woman who raised us, with a spine of steel weighing 90 pounds and shivering under a thin blanket because the heat had been cut off. Kelvin did not know any of this because Kelvin had not visited her in 2 years. He lived 20 minutes away from her in Chicago, but he never came by unless he thought he could squeeze $1 out of her. So I took her. I packed her things, I put her in my truck, and I brought her down here to Atlanta to live with me. I changed her phone number. I did not tell Kelvin because I knew if he found out she was gone, he would try to move into the house. And now here he was, killing her off over the phone. "Where is she now, Kelvin?" I asked. "The coroner took her," he said quickly. Too quickly. "Listen, Booker, there is a lot to handle. I have already arranged for a direct cremation. It is what she wanted. She told me last week she did not want a fuss. No open casket, just ashes to ashes." I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter until my knuckles turned white. "Cremation. Of course. If you burn the body, there is no evidence. If there is no funeral, no one sees that the casket is empty. It was a smart plan for a stupid man." "And Booker," he said, his voice shifting gears. The grief was evaporating, replaced by business. "We need to talk about the estate." "The estate," I repeated. "Yeah. Look, Mom did not leave a will. We both know that. But under Illinois state law, since I was her primary caregiver, since I was the one there every day, making sure she ate and took her medicine, the court appoints me as the administrator." I almost laughed out loud. Primary caregiver. The man who let the heating gas get shut off in the middle of a Chicago winter was calling himself a caregiver. So here's the situation, Kelvin rushed on, afraid I would interrupt. I spoke to a lawyer this morning. Since I have been living here and taking care of the property, and since you have been gone for 20 years living the high life in Atlanta, it is only fair that I inherit the house. You have your own money, Booker. You don't need this. I have debts. Mom wanted me to have the house. She told me right before she passed. She said, Kelvin, keep the house. Don't let Booker sell it. My mother, who was currently spreading strawberry jam on her second biscuit, had never said any such thing. In fact, the last time she spoke about Kelvin, she said she prayed the Lord would give him common sense because he certainly wasn't born with it. I looked at the phone, visualizing my brother on the other end. I could imagine him perfectly. He was probably sitting in his rented apartment, or maybe he had already broken into Mom's empty house, feet up on her coffee table, drinking a beer at 5 in the morning, calculating how much he could get for the place. The neighborhood was gentrifying. That old brick house, paid off since 1985, was worth at least $600,000. To a gambling addict like Kelvin, that wasn't a house. It was a winning lottery ticket. So you are saying you get everything I asked? It is just the way it has to be, Booker, he said, and I could hear the defensive edge in his voice. Do not try to fight me on this. I have already filed the paperwork. I am the administrator. You get nothing, and honestly, don't bother coming up for the funeral. Like I said, it is just a cremation. I will scatter the ashes myself. It is better if you remember her how she was. Save your money on the plane ticket. He wanted to erase me. He wanted to steal the house, fake her death, and keep me in Atlanta so I would never find out the truth. It was bold. It was evil. And it was incredibly reckless. Okay, Kelvin, I said. Okay. He sounded surprised. Yeah. Okay. If that is what Mom wanted. Silence on the other end. He hadn't expected it to be this easy. He was ready for a fight. He was ready for me to scream and threaten to sue. You agree? He asked. I am an old man, Kelvin. I am tired. If you say you were there for her, I have to believe you. You are my brother. Right. Exactly, Booker. We are family. I am glad you are being reasonable about this. I really am. I will send you the paperwork, he said, his voice light and giddy now. The tears were completely gone. I just need you to sign a waiver giving up your claim to the estate so I can process the deed transfer. I will email it to you. Send it, I said. I hung up the phone. The kitchen was quiet again except for the sound of Mama Lucinda stirring her tea. I stood there for a long moment, feeling the cold anger settling in my chest. It wasn't the hot, explosive anger of youth. It was the cold, hard anger of a structural engineer realizing that the building must be condemned. Who was that on the phone so early? Mama asked, not looking up from her plate. That was Kelvin, I said. She paused, the spoon freezing in midair. What did that boy want? Did he ask for money? I told you not to give him a dime. Booker? No, Mama, I said, walking over and sitting down opposite her. He didn't ask for money. He called to tell me that you died last night. Mama Lucinda slowly put her spoon down. She turned her head and looked at me. Her dark eyes, framed by wrinkles that held nearly a century of history, narrowed. He said, what he said, you died of a stroke in the kitchen in Chicago. He said he held your hand while you passed, and he said you left him the house and I am not to come to the funeral because he is cremating you today. Mama stared at me. For a second I thought the shock might actually be too much for her heart. But I underestimated Lucinda Ross. Her shock didn't turn into fear. It turned into fury. Her hands, gnarled with arthritis, clenched into fists on the table. He said, I am dead, she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. That boy told you I am dead so he could sell my house. Yes, ma'am. Hand me the phone, Booker, she commanded, reaching out a shaking hand. Hand me the phone right now. I am going to call him and tell him exactly how dead I am. I am going to put the fear of God into him so deep he won't be able to sit down for a week. I hesitated. My instinct was to give her the phone. It would be satisfying. It would be an explosion. Kelvin would hear her voice from the grave and probably have a heart attack right there. It would be over in 5 minutes. But then I thought about the last 10 years. I thought about the gambling debts I had paid off for him. I thought about the times he stole Mama's jewelry. I thought about how he looked at us not as family but as resources to be mined. If we yelled at him now, he would just run. He would disappear, maybe try some other scam later. He would never learn. He would never pay. I pulled the phone back. No, Mama, I said gently. What do you mean, no? Give me the phone. I reached out and covered her small hand with mine. Her skin was paper thin and warm. If you call him now, he will just hang up and run away, I said. He will deny it. He will say it was a misunderstanding. He will spin another lie, and he will get away with it just like he always does. Mama looked at me, her eyes searching mine. Then what do we do, Booker? Are we just going to let him tell people I am dead? Are we going to let him steal the house your father built with his bare hands? No, I said. We are going to let him think he succeeded. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the sunrise bleeding orange and purple across the Atlanta sky. We are going to let him file the death certificate, I said. We are going to let him plan the memorial service. We are going to let him stand in front of God and everyone and lie. We are going to let him sign the papers to sell the house. We are going to let him dig the hole so deep that he can never climb out of it. I turned back to my mother. You want justice? Mama? Justice isn't a phone call. Justice is a trap. And Kelvin just walked right into it. Mama Lucinda looked at me for a long time. She took a deep breath, picking up her tea again. The anger in her eyes cooled down into something sharper, something dangerous. She took a sip, swallowed, and then a small, grim smile appeared on her lips. Okay, Booker, she said softly. Let's bury him. I smiled back. It wasn't a nice smile. Before I continue this story and tell you how we orchestrated the most public downfall in the history of our family, I want to know where you are watching from. Are you the type to forgive and forget, or do you believe that some betrayals require a receipt? Let me know in the comments below. I walked into my study and opened my laptop. The first thing I did was not book a flight. I logged into my bank account and transferred $5,000 to a man named Reynolds. Reynolds was a private investigator I served with in Vietnam. He lived in Chicago. He was the kind of man who could find a needle in a haystack and then tell you who put the needle there and why. I typed a simple email to Reynolds, subject proof of life. Target Kelvin Ross. Mission document everything. He says our mother is dead. She is sitting in the next room. I want pictures of him celebrating. I want to know who he is talking to. I want to know who is helping him. Then I opened a new tab and searched for the obituary. Kelvin worked fast. It was already there, posted on a free memorial website. In loving memory of Lucinda Ross, 1929 to 2023, passed peacefully in her home surrounded by her loving son, Kelvin. I read the words and felt bile rise in my throat. Surrounded by her loving son. The audacity was breathtaking. My phone buzzed again. It was an email from Kelvin. Attached was a PDF waiver of interest in estate property. He had clearly had this ready for weeks, maybe months. He was just waiting for the right time to pull the trigger. I downloaded the document. I read it carefully. It was poorly drafted, probably something he downloaded off the internet, but it was legally binding if I signed it. It stated that I, Booker Ross, voluntarily gave up all rights to the property at 4522 South King Drive. I sat there, my finger hovering over the mouse. Most people would scream. Most people would call the police immediately. But I am an engineer. You don't demolish a building by hitting it with a hammer at random. You identify the load-bearing pillars. You weaken them one by one. And then gravity does the rest. I needed him to feel safe. I needed him to feel victorious. I printed the document. I signed it. But I didn't sign it with my legal signature. I signed it with a slight variation, a small loop in the B that I only used on documents I intended to contest later. It was a trick my father taught me. Always leave yourself a backdoor, son. I scanned it and emailed it back to Kelvin with a short note. Here it is. Take care of everything. I am too heartbroken to deal with this. Sent. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the rat to smell the cheese. But I wasn't just going to sit in Atlanta and wait. I needed to see the damage with my own eyes. I needed to see the face of the woman who was helping him because Kelvin was not smart enough to pull this off alone. He needed a brain, and I knew exactly who that brain belonged to. Jessica, his wife. The woman who smiled at family reunions while refusing to eat my mother's cooking. I walked back into the kitchen. Mama had finished her biscuit. Pack your bags, Mama, I said. She looked up. Where are we going? We are going home, I said. But not today. We are going to wait until the funeral. She nodded slowly. I want to wear my red dress, she said. The one your father bought me for our 50th anniversary. Why that one, I asked. Because she said taking another sip of tea if I am coming back from the dead, I want to look like I mean business. I watched her, this 94-year-old woman who had survived segregation, poverty, and the loss of a husband, preparing to go to war with her own son. Kelvin had made a fatal calculation error. He thought he was dealing with a helpless old woman and a senile old man. He forgot that we came from a generation that didn't just survive storms, we built the shelters. I picked up my phone and dialed Reynolds. He answered on the first ring. "Booker, long time. I need eyes on my brother," I said. "He just told me Mom is dead." "I'm sorry to hear that," Reynolds said. "Don't be," I replied. "She's right here." There was a long silence on the line. Then I heard Reynolds chuckle. It was a dry, dark sound. "So it's like that, is it?" "It's like that," I said. "Start the clock." I hung up. The game had begun. And Kelvin had no idea that the pawns on his board were about to start moving on their own. Most men in my position would have been on the first flight to O'Hare International Airport. They would have stormed into that house on the south side of Chicago, kicked down the door, and choked the life out of their lying brother. But I am not most men. I am a structural engineer. You do not fix a cracking dam by punching it. You fix it by relieving the pressure in one area and increasing it in another until the water flows exactly where you want it to go. If I went to Chicago now, it would just be a domestic dispute. It would be my word against his. He would play the victim. He would say he made a mistake, that the stress of caregiving confused him. He would cry, and the judge would tell us to settle it in family court. No, I did not want a family dispute. I wanted a criminal conviction. I sat in my study in Atlanta looking at a framed photograph of the house at 4522 South King Drive. To a stranger, it was just a sturdy two-story red brick building in Bronzeville with a wide porch and a small yard. But to me, it was a monument. My father, big, intense Walter Ross, bought that house in 1965. He worked double shifts at the steel mill for 20 years to pay it off. He laid the hardwood floors himself. He planted the oak tree in the back that was now tall enough to shade the entire roof. That house was the only reason my mother had security in her old age. And because of the way the city was changing, because of the developers swarming the neighborhood like termites, that house was now worth over $600,000. Kelvin did not see the history. He did not see the sweat my father poured into the foundation. Kelvin only saw $600,000. I knew my brother. I knew he had been gambling again. I had seen the signs the last time we spoke, the way his eyes darted around, the way he licked his lips when he talked about money. He was likely in deep with loan sharks, the kind of men who do not accept excuses. That was why he was desperate enough to kill our mother on paper. He needed that house to pay for his life, even if it meant destroying ours. I picked up the phone again. Reynolds had texted me a confirmation. He was in position. Reynolds was a man I met in the jungle of Vietnam in 1971. We were both young, scared, and far from home. He was a reconnaissance specialist then, and he was a private investigator now. He didn't have an office. He worked out of his van, and he was the best in Chicago. He didn't care about the law as much as he cared about the truth. "I need you to understand something, Reynolds," I had told him when I wired the money. "I don't just want you to watch him. I want you to document every breath he takes. If he sneezes, I want to know who handed him the tissue." I waited. The waiting is the hardest part of any demolition. You set the charges, you clear the area, and you stand there with your hand on the plunger, sweating, wondering if the wiring is right. I spent the rest of that day tending to Mama. We didn't talk much about Kelvin. We watched old westerns on the television and ate soup. Every now and then she would look at me and ask, "Is he still digging Booker?" And I would nod and say, "Yes, Mama, he is digging the hole deeper every hour." At 8 o'clock that evening, my computer chimed. It was an email from Reynolds. The subject line was simply, "You are not going to believe this." I opened the email. There was no text, just a series of high-resolution photographs and a video file. I clicked on the first photo. It was taken from a car parked across the street from my mother's house. The timestamp was 7:30 p.m. The house was lit up like a Christmas tree. Every light in every room was blazing. There were 4 cars parked in the driveway and 2 more on the street. These weren't funeral cars. One was a bright red convertible, another was a luxury SUV. I clicked the next photo. It was a zoom in on the front porch. There was Kelvin. He wasn't wearing black. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a Hawaiian shirt and holding a bottle of champagne. He was laughing, his head thrown back, his mouth open wide. Next to him was Jessica, my sister-in-law. I have always tried to be a fair man. I tried to give Jessica the benefit of the doubt when Kelvin married her 5 years ago. She was younger than him, 40 years old, with bleached blonde hair and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She liked to talk about her refined upbringing, but she spent money like a sailor on shore leave. She treated my mother like a nuisance, like a piece of old furniture that clashed with her decor. In the photo, Jessica was wearing a white dress. 12 hours after her mother-in-law supposedly died. She was holding a crystal flute glass, one of my mother's good crystal glasses that she only used for Easter dinner. Jessica was toasting. My hand shook as I clicked on the video file. The audio was clear. Reynolds must have used a parabolic microphone. The video showed Kelvin and Jessica standing in the center of the living room. The curtains were open. They didn't care who saw. They wanted the world to see. Kelvin was popping the cork on the champagne. The foam spilled over onto my mother's Persian rug, the rug she had cleaned by hand for 30 years. "To freedom," Kelvin shouted, raising the bottle. "To the jackpot," Jessica screamed back. Her voice was shrill, piercing through the speakers of my laptop. They clinked glasses. Jessica took a long gulp and then grabbed Kelvin by the collar, pulling him down for a kiss. When she pulled away, she looked directly out the window as if she were looking right at me, right at the camera. "I cannot believe we pulled it off," she said, laughing. "I thought that old witch would never die." "She is not dead, babe. She is just evaporated," Kelvin said, slurring his words slightly. He was already drunk. "Who cares?" Jessica spun around, her arms wide, encompassing the living room. "Look at this place, Kelvin. The woodwork, the molding. The realtor said we can get $650 if we stage it right. $650,000. Do you know what we can do with that?" "We can pay off the guys," Kelvin said, his voice dropping a little. "Screw the guys," Jessica snapped. "We pay them the minimum. The rest is for us. We are going to Paris. We are going to get that condo in Florida. I am done with Chicago winters. Finally, the old hag is gone, and we are rich. We are finally rich." I paused the video. The image froze on Jessica's face. Her mouth was open in a triumphant grin. Her eyes were greedy. She looked like a predator who had just taken down a gazelle and was preparing to feast. I looked at the timestamp again, 7:45 p.m. My mother had supposedly died less than 24 hours ago. A normal son would be at the morgue. A normal son would be calling relatives. A normal son would be sitting in the dark, mourning. Kelvin and Jessica were throwing a party. They weren't just celebrating money. They were celebrating the death of the woman who gave Kelvin life. They were dancing on her grave before it was even dug. I felt a coldness spread through my veins that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It was the absolute final severance of the bond between brothers. Up until this moment, a small, foolish part of me hoped that maybe Kelvin was being coerced. Maybe he was scared, maybe he was just weak. But looking at that video, I saw the truth. He wasn't weak. He was willing. He was enjoying this. He felt entitled to it. And Jessica, she was the architect. Kelvin was the hammer, but she was the hand swinging it. She was the one talking about realtors. She was the one talking about Paris. She had been planning this. She had been waiting for my mother to die, like a vulture waiting on a branch. I saved the video to 3 different hard drives. I emailed a copy to my lawyer. Then I called Reynolds. "Did you get it?" he asked. "I got it," I said. "Do you want me to go knock on the door?" Reynolds asked. "I can go over there and scare them straight, Booker. I can put the fear of God in them." "No," I said. My voice was calm, almost robotic. "Don't touch them. Don't let them know you are there. You want to let them keep partying." Reynolds sounded disgusted. "They are spilling wine on your mama's rug, Booker. Let them party," I said. "Let them drink every bottle in the house. Let them feel invincible." I looked at the frozen image of Jessica again. When you catch a rat, Reynolds, you don't snap the trap when it sniffs the cheese. You wait until it takes the whole bite. You wait until it is so busy eating that it doesn't hear the spring coiling back. "What is the next move?" he asked. "Go to the hospital," I said. "Find out whose body he claimed. He has a death certificate. That means there is a body. Find out who he burned. Copy that," Reynolds said. I closed the laptop and walked out of the study. The house was dark now. I walked down the hallway to the guest room where Mama was sleeping. The door was cracked open. I could hear her soft, rhythmic breathing. I stood there for a long time listening to the sound of her life. Kelvin had made a mistake. He thought the money was the power. He thought the house was the power. But he was wrong. The power was the truth, and I was hoarding the truth like ammunition. He wanted to play dead fine. We would play dead. But when we rose, it wouldn't be a resurrection. It would be a reckoning. I went back to the kitchen and made myself another cup of tea. I had a lot of work to do. Creating a legal hell for your own brother takes a lot of paperwork, and I intended to cross every T and dot every I. I wanted to make sure that when the gavel came down, it would sound like a thunderclap. The party in Chicago was just getting started. But down here in Atlanta, the storm was gathering. And unlike the weather, this storm had a name, and it was heading straight for 4522 South King Drive. I sat there in the dim light of my home office and watched the printer spit out the document. It was a slow, rhythmic sound, like a machine gun firing in slow motion. The paper was warm when I picked it up. It was a standard state of Illinois certificate of death. It had the official seal. It had the signature of the attending physician. And right there in the center of the page, in bold black letters, was the name Lucinda May Ross. According to this piece of paper, my mother was dead. I read the details. Date of death, yesterday. Time, 8:42 p.m. Cause of death, acute ischemic stroke. Place of death, Cook County Hospital. Informant, Kelvin Ross. Son. It was a masterpiece of fiction. If I were a different man, I might have been impressed by the thoroughness of the lie. But I am not a different man. I am a man who looks at a blueprint and asks where the load-bearing walls are. And looking at this document, I knew the structure was unsound. My phone rang. It was Reynolds. "I have the answer, Booker," he said. His voice was rough like gravel grinding against steel. "And you are not going to like it. Tell me," I said. "I went to the hospital records department," Reynolds said. "I called in a few favors. I found out who died in that bed at 8:42 p.m. last night. It wasn't Mom," I said. "No, it wasn't your mother. But it was a Lucinda Ross." I frowned, leaning back in my leather chair. "What are the odds, Reynolds, in a city of 3 million people better than you think? But here's the kicker. She was homeless, Booker. She was a John Doe admission. No ID, no emergency contact. She was brought in by an ambulance from under the Wacker Drive Bridge. She had nothing. No family, no address. Just a name she gave the nurse before she lost consciousness." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. "So she died alone," I whispered. "She died alone," Reynolds confirmed. "And normally her body would have gone to the county morgue. She would have waited there for 30 days, and if no one claimed her, she would have been buried in a pauper's grave at Homewood Memorial. But that didn't happen, because someone was listening to the police scanner. Or maybe someone has a friend in the intake ward who tips them off about potential matches." "Kelvin," I said. The name tasted like ash in my mouth. "Kelvin showed up at the hospital an hour after she died," Reynolds continued. "He put on the performance of a lifetime. He identified the body. He said, 'Oh my God, that is my mother.' He cried. He wailed. He told the staff that his mother had dementia and must have wandered out of the house. He apologized for not being there. He charmed the nurses. He signed the release forms." "But surely they checked," I said. "The age, the medical history. The woman who died was roughly 70, Reynolds said. She lived hard. The streets age you, Booker. She looked 90. And your brother, he counted on the system being overworked. It is a county hospital. They are underfunded and understaffed. They were relieved to have a family member show up to take the financial burden off the state. They didn't fingerprint her because there was no suspicion of foul play. It was just a natural death of an old woman. Kelvin saw an opportunity, and he took it. He stole a body," I said. My voice was trembling now, not with sadness but with a rage so white-hot it felt like ice. "It is worse than that, Booker." Reynolds paused, and I could hear him taking a drag of a cigarette. He signed the authorization for immediate cremation. I closed my eyes. Immediate cremation. That was the linchpin. That was the genius of his cruelty. If he buried her, someone might look in the casket. If he buried her, I could order an exhumation later and prove it wasn't Mama. But Ash is silent. Ash tells no tales. Once that poor woman's body was incinerated, there would be no DNA left to test. There would be no way to prove that the woman in the urn wasn't Lucinda Ross. Kelvin wasn't just stealing a house. He was erasing a human being. He was taking this poor homeless woman, a woman who had probably suffered her entire life, and he was denying her even her own name in death. He was using her corpse as a prop in his con game. "Where is the body now?" I asked. "At the crematorium on the west side," Reynolds said, "a place called Serenity Fire. It is a budget operation, no questions asked. The burn is scheduled for this afternoon." I looked at the clock on my wall. It was 10:00 a.m. "Can we stop it?" I asked. "Not without revealing your hand," Reynolds said. "If you call the crematorium now, you have to tell them your mother is alive. You have to involve the police immediately." Kelvin gets tipped off. He runs. He destroys the other evidence. He claims it was an honest mistake, that he was distraught and identified the wrong body in his grief. He walks away with a slap on the wrist for filing a false report. Reynolds was right. If I stopped it now, Kelvin would play the confused, grieving son. He would say the body looked just like her. He would get away with it. "Let it happen," I said. The words felt heavy like stones. "Are you sure?" Reynolds asked. "That is a heavy thing to carry, Booker. Letting a stranger burn under your mother's name." "I am not letting her burn for nothing, Reynolds. I am letting her become the evidence that buries him. I will find out who she really was later. I will make sure she gets a real memorial. But right now, I need Kelvin to think he has won. I need him to walk out of that crematorium with an urn in his hands, thinking he just got away with the perfect crime." I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking. I had to grip the edge of my desk to steady them. I walked out of my office and down the hall to the kitchen. Mama Lucinda was sitting there reading the newspaper. She looked up at me, smiling. "Is everything all right, Booker? You look like you saw a ghost." I looked at her. I looked at the way the morning light caught the silver in her hair. I looked at the wrinkles around her eyes that crinkled when she smiled. She was so alive. She was warm and solid and real. And somewhere in Chicago, a fire was being lit to consume a woman who had none of this love, none of this safety. I walked over and kissed my mother on the forehead. "Everything is fine, Mama." I lied. "Just work." I went back to my study and picked up the phone again. This time I dialed a number I hadn't called in years, but I knew it by heart. Clayton Vance, attorney at law. Clayton was the best civil litigator in Atlanta. We went to college together. He was a shark in a three-piece suit, a man who could smell blood in the water from 3 miles away. Booker Ross Clayton's booming voice came through the speaker. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Are you finally ready to patent that bridge design?" "Not today, Clayton. I need you to open a new file." I could hear the shift in his tone immediately. He heard the seriousness in my voice. "Talk to me. I need to sue my brother," I said. "But not just sue him. I need to prepare a case for fraud, forgery, theft by deception and abuse of a corpse." Clayton whistled low and long. "Abuse of a corpse." "Booker, what the hell is going on?" I explained it all. I told him about the call, the fake death, the party with the champagne, and the homeless woman who was currently being turned into ash to facilitate a real estate transaction. I spoke for 20 minutes. Clayton did not interrupt once. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. "I have heard some sick stories in my time," Booker Clayton said quietly. "But this is biblical. This is Cain and Abel stuff. Can you help me?" I asked. "Help you?" Clayton scoffed. "I am going to enjoy this. I will clear my calendar. What do you need?" "I need you to draft a restraining order, a freeze on all assets, and a criminal complaint," I said. "But do not file them yet." "Why not?" Clayton asked. "We have enough to stop him right now." "Because he hasn't sold the house yet," I said. "If we stop him now, it is just attempted fraud. He can say he was confused. He can say he was grieving. But if he signs that deed, if he takes the money from the buyer, then it is a completed felony. It is grand larceny. It is irrevocable." "You want him to hang himself," Clayton said. "I want him to build the gallows, tie the knot, and kick the chair out from under his own feet," I replied. "I want you to have the papers ready. I am coming to Chicago on Friday. I will bring Mama." "We will walk into that house right when he is signing the papers." "Booker, that is dangerous," Clayton warned. "If he is desperate enough to burn a body—" "He is a coward, Clayton. He is tough when he thinks no one is watching. He is tough when he is bullying a 94-year-old woman. But when he sees me, when he sees the law, he will crumble. Just draft the papers. I want everything ready to drop on his head like a 10-ton weight." "Consider it done," Clayton said. "I will have a courier bring the drafts to your house tonight." "And Booker." "Yeah, I am sorry about your brother. I know you tried to help him. I didn't answer. I just looked at the death certificate on my desk one last time. The brother I tried to help died a long time ago. The man in Chicago is a stranger, and I treat strangers who threaten my family exactly the way they deserve. I hung up the phone. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now all I had to do was wait for the funeral. Kelvin wanted a show. I would give him a show. I would give him a resurrection he would never forget. I opened my laptop again and looked at the email from Kelvin. He had sent a follow-up. Bro, just checking you got the waiver. The crematorium says the ashes will be ready tomorrow. I found a nice spot by the lake to scatter them. Hope you are holding up. I typed a reply. I am holding up fine, Kelvin. Scatter them well. Make sure the wind is blowing the right way. See you sooner than you think. I didn't send it. I deleted the draft. Instead, I typed, waiver signed and sent. Do what you have to do. I hit send. Then I went to the closet and pulled out my black suit. It smelled like cedar and old memories. I brushed off the dust. I hadn't worn it since my wife's funeral. I hated this suit. But Mama was right. If we were going to come back from the dead, we needed to dress for the occasion. I walked to the window and looked north toward Chicago. Enjoy your champagne, Kelvin, I whispered to the empty room. Enjoy the silence. Because the noise is coming, and it is going to be deafening. If Kelvin was the blunt instrument that broke our family apart, then Jessica was the poison that seeped into the cracks to make sure it could never be put back together. My brother had always been a hustler and a gambler, but he lacked the organizational skills to dismantle a life as completely as what I was witnessing now. Kelvin saw the house as a pile of cash, but Jessica saw our family history as an inconvenience that needed to be scrubbed away to make room for her delusions of grandeur. I spent the next morning in my study with Reynolds on the other line and a live feed of Facebook Marketplace open on my monitor. It was a digital garage sale of my entire childhood. I watched in real time as the physical evidence of the Ross family legacy was photographed, uploaded, and captioned with insults. The first item to appear was the quilt. It was a heavy patchwork blanket made of scraps of wool and cotton. To the untrained eye, it looked like old bedding. Jessica had listed it for $15. The caption read, "Old dusty blanket, heavy and smells like mothballs. Perfect for a dog bed or moving padding. Porch pickup only." My hand hovered over the mouse and I felt a tremor in my fingers that had nothing to do with age. That quilt was not a dog bed. My grandmother had stitched that quilt by hand in 1942 while her husband was fighting in the Pacific. Every square of fabric came from a dress she had worn, or a shirt my grandfather had worked in. That quilt had kept me warm when I had the measles at age 6. It had comforted Kelvin when he came home crying after his first heartbreak. It was not fabric, it was DNA. It was history. And Jessica was selling it for the price of 2 lattes because she thought it smelled old. Next came the dining room chairs. Hand-carved oak. My father had bought them at an estate sale in 1968 and refinished them himself in the garage. He spent weeks sanding down the varnish until his hands were raw just so we would have a respectable place to eat Sunday dinner. Jessica listed them as outdated wooden chairs, heavy and ugly, free to whoever can haul them away today, need space ASAP. She was clearing the stage. She was erasing us. Reynolds spoke in my ear. "She is moving fast, Booker. I am sitting 2 houses down. I see people pulling up to the curb. They are loading up your life into pickup trucks. Let them take it," I said. My voice was hollow. "You want me to stop them?" Reynolds asked. "I can go buy it all, Booker. I can act like a buyer and store it in my van." "No," I said. "If you buy it, she gets the money. If you buy it, she thinks she is succeeding. We need the house to be empty. We need her to feel like she has won." "But the Bible, Booker. Look at the latest listing." I refreshed the page. My stomach dropped. There it was, the family Bible. The leather cover was cracked and worn. The pages were soft as onion skin. Inside the front cover were the names of 5 generations of Rosses, births, deaths, marriages. It was the only record we had of some of our ancestors who were born before the county kept records for black folks. Jessica had listed it for $5. The caption said, "Old book, religious stuff, good for crafts or decoupage." Decoupage. She wanted someone to cut up my ancestors' names to decorate a coffee table. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I had to think like an engineer. When a building is being demolished, you cannot save the wallpaper. You have to focus on the foundation. The Bible was just paper. The history was in my blood. The history was sitting in the next room eating oatmeal. I could not risk the main objective to save a book. "Let it go, Reynolds," I said. Just then my cell phone rang. The screen lit up with her name. Jessica. I let it ring twice. I needed to compose myself. I needed to find the voice of the defeated grieving brother. I needed to sound like the man she thought I was, weak, distant, and easily manipulated. I picked up. "Hello, Jessica." "Oh, Booker," she sighed. Her voice was dripping with a synthetic sweetness that made my teeth ache. It sounded like she was rehearsing for a soap opera. "I am so glad I caught you. Kelvin is just a mess. The poor man hasn't stopped crying since... well, you know." I looked at the photo Reynolds had sent me earlier of Kelvin popping champagne. "How is he holding up?" I asked. "Not good, Booker. Not good at all. He is devastated. Mom was his whole world, you know. He was with her every single day. It is hitting him so hard." She paused, waiting for me to validate her lie. "I am sure it is," I said. "Listen, Booker," she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We need to talk about the funeral, or rather, the lack of one. I know Kelvin told you about the cremation, but I wanted to explain why we made that decision." "Go ahead." "It was Mom's wish," she said. "She was very clear about it in her final days. She said she didn't want people staring at her. She didn't want sadness. And honestly, Booker, she was worried about you." "Worried about me?" I asked. "Yes. She knew how busy you are down there in Atlanta with your big important projects. She always said Booker has his own life now, he is too good for us. She didn't want to be a burden to you. She specifically said, tell Booker not to come. Tell him to save his money. Flights are so expensive these days, and she knew you are on a fixed income. I am a retired structural engineer with a pension and a portfolio that could buy Jessica's entire existence 10 times over. But to her, I was just an old man in the South. She was trying to frame my absence as a favor to me while simultaneously twisting the knife about my relationship with my mother. She said I was too good for you, I asked, playing the part. Well, you know how she got at the end, Jessica said. Her mind wasn't all there. She had a lot of anger, Booker. To be honest, she held a grudge against you. She felt you abandoned the family. I looked over at the open door of my study. I could see Mama Lucinda's slippered feet resting on the ottoman. She held a grudge, I repeated. It was the dementia, Jessica said quickly. We don't hold it against her, but that is why I am calling. I think it would be a mistake for you to come up here right now. The energy in the house, it is very heavy. And if you come here, it might disturb her spirit. You know how superstitious old folks can be. If you come here and she died angry at you, well, we just want her to rest in peace. Plus, there is nothing for you to do. We have handled everything. The house is being cleaned out. We are donating all her old junk to charity. Donating, I asked. Is that what you call it? Yes, just clearing out the clutter so we can process everything. It is a lot of work, Booker. Kelvin is exhausted. I am exhausted. We are doing this all for the family. We don't want you to have to lift a finger. Just stay in Atlanta, light a candle, send a card. That is what she would have wanted. She was boxing me out. She was using my mother's ghost to build a wall around Chicago. She wanted to make sure I didn't see the empty house. She didn't want me to see the for sale sign that I knew was already sitting in the trunk of her car. And most of all, she didn't want me to talk to the neighbors. I leaned back in my chair. She thought she was the puppet master. She thought she was pulling my strings. You make a lot of sense, Jessica, I said slowly. I could hear her exhale. It was the sound of a tension cable snapping. I am glad you understand, she said. We just want what is best for everyone. You are right, I said. I probably shouldn't come. I am an old man. Travel is hard on me. And if Mom didn't want me there... Exactly, Jessica interrupted. Why spend the money? Why put yourself through the stress? We will send you some of the ashes. You can have your own private ceremony. That sounds appropriate, I said. Great, she said. Her voice was bright now, chirpy. The grief mask had slipped completely. So, we are agreed. You stay there, we handle things here. Oh, and Booker, I sent you a document to sign electronically. Just a formality for the cremation records. Did you get it? I got it, I said. Wonderful. Sign that as soon as you can. We want to make sure the paperwork is clean. Jessica, I said, dropping my voice slightly. Yes. Just promise me one thing. Anything, Booker. Take care of the house. That place meant everything to Dad. And the things inside, Just make sure they go to people who will appreciate them." There was a pause, a beat of silence where I could practically hear her rolling her eyes. "Of course, Booker," she said. "We are treating everything with the utmost respect. We are cherishing every memory." "Thank you, Jessica. You are a good sister-in-law." We said our goodbyes. She hung up thinking she had just played the greatest hand of poker in her life. She thought she had convinced the gullible old man to stay in his hole. She thought she had cleared the last obstacle between her and the payday. I put the phone down and walked into the living room. Mama Lucinda was watching a game show. She looked up as I entered. "Was that the witch?" she asked. Mama didn't mince words. "That was Jessica," I said, sitting down on the sofa next to her. "What lies did she tell today?" Mama asked. "She is selling your Bible for $5, I said. "And the quilt Grandma made. She listed it as a dog bed." Mama's face didn't crumble. It hardened. Her jaw set in a line that I recognized from my childhood. It was the look she gave me when I was a teenager and thought I could outsmart her. It was the look of a matriarch who was done being polite. "A dog bed," she whispered. "And she said I shouldn't come to the funeral," I continued. "She said you died hating me. She said you thought I was too good for this family. She said my presence would disturb your spirit." Mama let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a dry sound devoid of humor. "She doesn't know anything about spirits," she said, "but she is about to learn." I took Mama's hand. Her skin was dry, but her grip was strong. "She thinks I am staying here, Mama. She thinks I am scared and broke. She thinks she has won." "Good," Mama said. "Let her think she is the queen of the castle. Let her sell the chairs. Let her sell the quilt. Those are just things, Booker. The memories are in here." She tapped her chest. "And the justice?" "The justice is coming with us." I looked at the time. It was noon. "I need to call Clayton," I said. "We need to expedite the filing. If she is clearing the house, that means the buyer is close. She is staging it." "Go," Mama said. "Do what you have to do." "But, Booker..." "Yes, Mama. Get that Bible back. I don't care how you do it. You tell your friend Reynolds to buy it. You tell him I will pay him back with interest. But I am not letting that heifer sell my ancestors for $5. I smiled. "I already texted him, Mama. He bought it 10 minutes ago. He is picking it up right now." Mama Lucinda leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. "Good," she said. "Now let me watch my show. I need to rest. I have a funeral to attend on Friday." I walked back to my office. The anger I felt toward Jessica had shifted. It was no longer a hot, burning rage. It had cooled into a solid, cold resolve. She wasn't just a thief. She was a vandal. She was destroying the architecture of our history because she was too shallow to understand its value. She called the house a payday. She called my mother's life clutter. I looked at the computer screen. Reynolds had sent a new picture. It was a photo of the Bible sitting on the passenger seat of his van. Secured, the text read. She tried to charge me $10 because she said there was a lot of interest. I paid it. I typed back, "Worth every penny. Keep watching." Jessica thought she was the puppet master. She thought she was pulling the strings, making the puppets dance. But she didn't realize that the strings were actually nooses. And with every lie she told, with every item she sold, she was tightening the loop around her own neck. I picked up the file Clayton had sent over. The header read State of Illinois versus Kelvin Ross and Jessica Ross. I took a pen and underlined her name. "You want to sell my history, Jessica," I thought. "Fine. But the price is going to be higher than you can imagine." I prepared to book 2 one-way tickets to Chicago. We weren't going to save the furniture. We were going to save the truth. And we were going to deliver it in person, right when she felt safest. Friday morning arrived with a gray, heavy sky that matched the mood in my living room. I had connected my laptop to the large television screen on the wall. The technology was modern, but the feeling was ancient. It was the feeling of watching a storm roll in from the ocean, knowing it was going to tear the roof off your house, but being unable to do anything but wait. Mama Lucinda sat in her favorite armchair. She was wearing her red dress. It was not a funeral dress. It was a celebration dress. It was the dress she wore to weddings and baptisms. She had insisted on putting on her makeup. She applied her lipstick with a steady hand, even though I knew her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. We were about to watch her funeral. Kelvin had set up a live stream on Facebook. He claimed it was for the distant relatives who could not afford to travel, but I knew the truth. It was a marketing tool. He wanted the widest possible audience for his performance because the more people who watched, the more legitimate his lie became. The feed flickered to life at 10:00 sharp. The camera was positioned at the back of the chapel at Johnson & Sons Funeral Home. It was a budget establishment on the west side, a place known for quick turnovers and cheap caskets. But Kelvin had dressed it up. I had to give him credit for his attention to detail when money was on the line. There were flowers everywhere, huge sprays of white lilies and red roses. I did a quick mental calculation. Those flowers cost at least $2,000. He was spending the money he expected to get from the house sale before the ink was even dry. At the front of the room, on a small table draped in white velvet, sat the urn. It was a brass vessel, shiny and vulgar. It looked like something you would buy at a pawn shop, and inside that brass pot was the ash of a stranger. A woman who had died under a bridge alone and nameless was now the center of attention in a room full of people who thought they were mourning Lucinda Ross. I looked at Mama. She was staring at the urn. Her hands were gripping the armrests of her chair so hard that her knuckles were the color of bleached bone. "That is not me," she whispered. Her voice was thin. "That is not me in that pot, Booker." "I know, Mama," I said softly. "I know." The pews were full. I recognized the faces. There was Mrs. Gable from next door wearing the same black hat she had worn to my father's funeral 20 years ago. There was Deacon Miller leaning on his cane, his head bowed in prayer. There were the ladies from the choir holding tissues and fanning themselves with church programs. These were good people. They were people who had eaten at my mother's table. They were people who had prayed with her and laughed with her. And they were being used. They were extras in a movie directed by a sociopath. Then Kelvin walked into the frame. He was wearing a black suit that fit him a little too tightly around the waist. He walked with a stoop, a heavy, trudging gait that suggested a man crushed by the weight of the world. He was holding a handkerchief to his face. Behind him walked Jessica. She was wearing a black dress that was inappropriate for a funeral. It was too short, too tight, and cut too low. She wore sunglasses big enough to cover half her face, and she was clinging to Kelvin's arm as if she were the one who needed support. They sat in the front row. I watched as Mrs. Gable leaned over and patted Kelvin's hand. I saw Kelvin nod and wipe a tear from his cheek. "He is good," I said. I hated to admit it, but he was good. "He is the devil," Mama said. The service began. The preacher was a man I did not recognize. He was not from Mama's church. He was likely a hired hand, someone Kelvin paid to say generic words about a woman he had never met. He spoke about peace and rest. He spoke about the circle of life. He mispronounced my mother's middle name, calling her Lucille instead of Lucinda. Mama flinched at the mistake. Then came the moment we had been waiting for. The eulogy. Kelvin stood up. He walked to the podium, slowly pausing to touch the brass urn as if he could not bear to be separated from it. He stood there for a long moment, head bowed, letting the silence stretch out until the audience was leaning forward in their seats. "Friends," he began. His voice cracked perfectly on the first word. "Family. Neighbors." He looked up, tears streaming down his face. I wondered if he had used an onion or if he was just that talented. "You all knew my mother as a strong woman. You knew her as the pillar of this community. But over the last few years, I knew her as something else. I knew her as a fragile bird that needed to be protected. I felt the bile rising in my throat. Fragile bird. This was the woman who chased a burglar out of her house with a cast-iron skillet when she was 70. My brother Booker could not be here today," Kelvin continued, and a murmur went through the crowd. "He is busy in Atlanta. He has his own life. But that is okay, because it gave me the privilege, the absolute honor of caring for my mother in her final days." He paused to wipe his nose. "I want to tell you about her last night," he said. His voice dropped to a whisper and the camera zoomed in. I was sitting by her bedside. She was so weak she could hardly lift her head. I had been feeding her soup spoon by spoon, just like she used to feed me when I was a baby. I wiped her brow. I held her hand, and she looked at me with those beautiful eyes, and she said, "Kelvin, you are a good son. You are the only one who really stayed." "Liar," Mama shouted at the screen. She stood up from her chair, trembling with rage. "Liar! I haven't seen you in 2 years. You never fed me soup. You stole my food stamps." I stood up and put my arm around her, but she was rigid with anger. He wasn't finished. "She told me she was worried about the house," Kelvin said. She was worried about what would happen to the home my father built, and I promised her right there as she took her last breath. I said, "Mama, I will protect it. I will make sure it stays in the family. I will use it to build a future just like you wanted." And she squeezed my hand one last time, and she smiled. And then she was gone. The crowd in the church was weeping. Mrs. Gable was sobbing into her handkerchief. Even the hired preacher looked moved. It was a masterful piece of fiction. He had painted himself as the saint and me as the absentee villain. He had rewritten history to justify his theft. And friends, Kelvin said, his voice becoming stronger now, more businesslike. Mama didn't have insurance. She didn't believe in it. And the medical bills from her care are overwhelming. I spent every dime I had to make sure she was comfortable. I don't regret it. I would do it again. But now I am asking for your help. Not for me, but to honor her memory. Jessica stood up then. She picked up a velvet collection basket and started walking down the aisle. "We have set up a memorial fund," Kelvin said. "Anything you can give will help us pay for this beautiful service and settle her final debts so she can rest in peace without owing a soul." I watched in horror as the basket moved from row to row. I saw Deacon Miller, who I knew lived on a fixed pension, pull a crumpled $20 bill from his pocket and drop it in. I saw the choir ladies opening their purses. They were paying him. They were giving their hard-earned money to a man who had just scammed them. They were paying for a cremation that cost $300 while he pocketed the rest. "He is robbing them," Mama whispered. She had stopped shouting. Her voice was now cold and hollow. "He is robbing my friends in my name." Jessica was moving through the crowd, nodding solemnly, touching people on the shoulder, thanking them. I could see the greed in her eyes even through the sunglasses. Every dollar that dropped into that basket was a victory for her. She wasn't mourning, she was counting. Kelvin stepped down from the podium. He went back to his seat and put his arm around Jessica. He looked at the camera one last time. He looked directly into the lens, and for a split second the mask slipped. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible smirk. It was a look that said, "I won." Then the feed went black. The silence in my living room was deafening. I walked over and turned off the television. The screen faded to black, but the image of that brass urn burned in my mind. "He is dead to me," Mama said. She sat back down in her chair. She smoothed the fabric of her red dress. Her face was dry. She had not shed a single tear during the entire broadcast. "He is not my son," she said. "Son. My son died a long time ago. That man in the suit, he is a monster." I knelt down beside her chair. "We leave tomorrow, Mama," I said. She looked at me. Her eyes were hard, like flint. "No," she said. "We leave tonight." I looked at her surprised. "Tonight?" "I want to be there before the sun comes up," she said. "I want to be standing on that porch when he comes to put the for sale sign in the yard. I want him to see me and think he has seen a ghost. I want to see the color drain from his face before I send him to hell." I nodded. I understood. The anger was fueling her, giving her an energy I hadn't seen in a decade. "Okay," I said. "I will pack the car." I went into my office to grab the file Clayton had sent over. The legal trap was ready. The restraining order, the fraud complaint, the affidavit from the hospital regarding the John Doe corpse. It was all there. I picked up the phone and called Reynolds. "It is done," Reynolds said. "I saw the whole thing. I got the license plates of every car there. I got video of Jessica counting the cash in the back room while the preacher was still praying." "How much?" I asked. "Looks like about $2,000, Reynolds said. "Not a bad haul for an hour of acting." "Keep the tape safe," I said. "We are coming up. We are leaving tonight." "Drive safe," Booker Reynolds said. "The weather in Chicago is turning. There is a storm coming." I looked out the window at the Atlanta sky. The storm is already there. "Reynolds," I said, "it is driving a Ford F-150, and it is bringing the wrath of God with it." I hung up. I walked through the house, turning off the lights. I felt a strange sense of calm. The waiting was over. The strategy was set. Kelvin thought he had buried his past. He thought he had burned the evidence. But he forgot the most basic rule of engineering. You cannot build a stable structure on a foundation of lies. Eventually the ground shifts. Eventually the cracks appear. And eventually the whole thing comes crashing down. I went to the garage and started the truck. The engine roared to life, a deep guttural sound in the quiet night. Mama came out the side door carrying her purse and her Bible. She climbed into the passenger seat without a word. She looked straight ahead, her jaw set, her eyes focused on the road. "Let's go get my house back," she said. I put the truck in gear and we rolled out into the darkness, heading north, heading toward the conflict, heading toward the moment when the dead would rise and the living would pay. Most people think that stealing a house is a complicated process involving months of paperwork and bureaucracy, but my brother Kelvin was about to prove that you can dismantle a legacy in less than an hour if you are desperate enough. The ink on the fake death certificate was barely dry when the shark started circling. I was sitting in my truck with Mama Lucinda. We were somewhere on I-65 crossing the border between Tennessee and Kentucky. The road was dark and the rhythm of the tires on the asphalt was hypnotic. But my mind was 300 miles ahead in Chicago. I had Reynolds on the speakerphone. He was parked down the street from the house and he had managed to slip a listening device into the mail slot earlier that morning. "He is here," Reynolds said. "The buyer. He drove up in a black Mercedes. Looks like money." I gripped the steering wheel. I knew this type of man. I had dealt with them my entire career in construction. They were developers who looked at a neighborhood not as a community of families, but as a spreadsheet of undervalued assets. They didn't see homes, they saw footprints for luxury condos. "Who is it?" I asked. Reynolds adjusted his frequency. "Name is Thorne. Marcus Thorne. He is a mid-level developer, known for flipping properties fast. He buys cash, he asks no questions, and he doesn't care who gets hurt as long as the title clears." I looked over at Mama. She was asleep, her head resting against the window. I was glad she couldn't hear this. "Turn up the audio, Reynolds," I said. "I want to hear the deal." The sound of static filled the cab of my truck, followed by the clear, crisp sound of voices in my mother's living room. I stood in the doorway of that house myself in my mind. I could see the worn velvet sofa where my father used to read the paper. I could see the piano where I learned to play scales. And now, standing in the middle of that sacred space, were 3 vultures picking at the bones of a life that wasn't even finished yet. "Mr. Ross, this is a very interesting situation," Thorne was saying. His voice was smooth, polished, like a stone. "I must say I have never seen a probate open and close this quickly. Your mother passed away. Yesterday I held my breath. This was the weak point. This was the crack in the foundation. Any legitimate businessman would walk away. You don't buy a house 24 hours after the owner dies. The body isn't even cold. The legal period for contesting the will hasn't even started." Kelvin's voice came through the speaker. It was high-pitched, nervous. "Well, you know how it is, Mr. Thorne. It was a long illness. We were prepared. Mom didn't want the house to sit empty. She wanted us to move on. We just want to get it done." I could hear the hesitation in Thorne's silence. He smelled fear. He smelled desperation. And when a developer smells desperation, the price goes down. "I understand that," Kelvin Thorne said slowly. "But the title transfer, usually there is a waiting period. There are creditors to notify. If I hand you a check today and a cousin pops up tomorrow claiming he owns half the house, I am the one left holding the bag. This paperwork, it looks rushed." Kelvin started to stammer. I could hear the panic rising in his throat. He was losing him. The fish was spitting out the hook. No, there is no one else. Just me. I am the only son. I mean, my brother is out of the picture. He signed a waiver. I have it right here. I smiled in the darkness of the truck cab. The waiver. The one I had signed with the loop in the B. The one that was worthless. Thorne was still skeptical. "I don't know, Mr. Ross. My legal team is going to want to vet this. Maybe we should wait a week. Let the dust settle." This was the moment. Kelvin was drowning. He was about to lose the $50,000 deposit he needed to pay off his gambling debts. If Thorne walked out that door, Kelvin was a dead man. And then Jessica spoke. Her voice was different than I had ever heard it. It wasn't the shrill, nagging voice she used with Kelvin, and it wasn't the fake, sweet voice she used with me. It was a voice of authority. It was a voice that carried the weight of social capital. "Mr. Thorne," Jessica said, stepping into the conversation. She sounded calm, educated, and utterly reasonable. "Can I speak to you plainly?" "Please," Mrs. Ross, Thorne said. "Look at us," Jessica said. "My husband is a grieving man. He is emotional. He isn't explaining this well. But I am a project manager. I handle logistics. We aren't rushing this because we are desperate. We are rushing this because we are efficient." I listened closely. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was code switching. She was using her whiteness, her articulate diction, and her appearance to bridge the gap between Kelvin and the developer. She was signaling to Thorne that he wasn't dealing with a stereotypical desperate family from the South Side. He was dealing with her. And in the eyes of a man like Thorne, that made all the difference. "We have already cleared the title search," Jessica continued. "I personally went to the county clerk's office this morning. The taxes are paid. The liens are clear. The waiver from the brother is notarized and digital. We are offering you a property in a prime gentrifying location for 20% under market value because we want a cash deal today. We are doing you a favor." She paused, letting the numbers sink in. Now she said, her voice hardening slightly. "If you are uncomfortable with the speed, we completely understand. We have another buyer coming at 3 o'clock, a gentleman from Century Holdings. He didn't seem to mind the timeline. But we liked you. We thought you would appreciate the opportunity." It was a bluff, a magnificent cold-blooded bluff. There was no other buyer, but she delivered it with such confidence that even I almost believed her. I heard the rustle of papers. I heard Thorne shifting in his seat. "Century Holdings, huh?" Thorne asked. "They are very aggressive," Jessica said. "But we would prefer to close with you. However, we need the deposit today. 50,000, non-refundable, the rest upon final deed recording on Monday." The cab of my truck was silent except for the hum of the engine. I glanced at the speedometer. I was doing 75. I wanted to drive through the phone and strangle her. She was selling my father's sweat and blood. She was selling the memories of Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings. And she was doing it with the cold efficiency of a corporate raider. Jessica wasn't just a participant. She was the architect. Kelvin was the greedy fool, but Jessica was the dangerous one. She was the one who knew how to manipulate the system. She was the one who knew that her face and her voice would soothe the suspicions of a white developer in a way Kelvin never could. There was a long pause. Then I heard the sound of a zipper being pulled. It was the sound of a leather portfolio opening. "Okay," Thorne said. "You make a compelling case, Mrs. Ross. I saw the paperwork," Jessica said. "Just sign here and here." I heard the scratching of a pen on paper. It was a scratching sound that felt like it was etching scars directly onto my heart. "Here is the cashier's check," Thorne said. $50,000. The escrow will handle the balance on Monday. But I want the keys today. I want my crew in here on Saturday morning to start the demo." "Demo?" Kelvin asked. "Demolition," Thorne said casually. "The house is old. The plumbing is shot. The layout is obsolete. We are going to scrape the lot. Knock it down. Put up a 6-unit luxury complex. You know how it is." I heard Kelvin make a small choking sound. Even in his greed, even in his betrayal, hearing that the house he grew up in was going to be turned into rubble had to sting. But Jessica didn't hesitate. "Of course," she said. "It is progress. The keys are right here." I heard the jingle of metal. Those were my father's keys. The keys he kept on a leather loop. The keys he used to open the door every night for 40 years. "Thank you," Thorne said. "Pleasure doing business with you." The door opened and closed. Thorne was gone. Silence returned to the room. Then a scream of joy erupted. "Yes!" Kelvin yelled. "Yes! 50,000! Look at it, baby. Look at all those zeros." "We did it," Jessica said. Her voice was breathless. I told you I could handle him. Did you see his face when I mentioned Century Holdings?" He folded like a cheap suit. "You are a genius," Kelvin said. The sound of a kiss. A wet, sloppy sound. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me." I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles popped. They were celebrating. They were dancing in the living room, holding a check that was the down payment on their own destruction. I looked at the road ahead. The signs for Louisville were coming up. We were still hours away. Reynolds came back on the line. "Did you get all that, Booker?" "I got it," I said. My voice was calm, but it was the calm of the eye of the hurricane. "They took the money," Reynolds said. "That is the line right there. It is no longer a civil dispute. It is criminal fraud. Grand larceny." "I know," I said. "What do you want me to do?" Reynolds asked. "Thorne is leaving." "Let him go," I said. "He is just a pawn. He will lose his 50,000 and it will be a lesson to him not to be so greedy." And the happy couple, "Let them spend the night counting their money," I said. "Let them pack their bags for Paris. Let them sleep on that mattress of lies one last time." I looked over at Mama. She was stirring, waking up. "Where are we, Booker?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. We are crossing the river, Mama, I said. Did he do it? She asked. Did he sell it? He took the money, I said. He sold the house to a man who wants to tear it down. Mama sat up straight. She smoothed her red dress. She didn't look sad. She looked ready. Tear it down, she whispered. Over my dead body. I smiled in the dark. That is exactly the point, Mama, I said. That is exactly the point. I pressed my foot down on the gas pedal. The truck surged forward, eating up the miles. Jessica thought she had used her privilege to seal the deal. She thought her white skin and her project manager voice were a shield. But she had forgotten one thing. In the eyes of the law, fraud is colorblind. And when we walked into that house tomorrow, she wasn't going to be the smart, sophisticated project manager anymore. She was going to be an accomplice. We drove through the night, fueled by coffee and vengeance. The road to Chicago is long, but when you are carrying the truth, it feels like you are flying. We were coming home, and we were bringing a storm that no amount of smooth talking could stop. Chicago greeted us with a cold wind off the lake that rattled the windows of my truck, but the chill inside the cabin was far colder. We had been driving for 11 hours. My back ached, and my eyes felt like they were filled with sand, but I did not stop for coffee, and I did not stop to rest. We had a timeline to keep. We crossed the city limits just as the morning traffic was beginning to clog the Dan Ryan Expressway. I looked over at Mama Lucinda. She had been awake for the last 100 miles, staring out the window at the skyline of the city she had called home for 70 years. She did not look nostalgic. She looked like a general surveying a battlefield before the first cannon fire. Drive past the house, she said. Her voice was quiet, but it had the weight of a command. No, Mama, I said, keeping my eyes on the road. If we drive past the house, Kelvin might see the truck. If he sees the truck, the element of surprise is gone. We are not here to sightsee. We are here to execute a demolition. She nodded slowly, accepting the logic. She adjusted her hat, the wide-brimmed black one she wore to church on Sundays. She checked her lipstick in the visor mirror. She wanted to look her best for the performance of a lifetime. We did not go to the house on South King Drive. Instead, I took the exit for Wentworth Avenue and pulled into the parking lot of the Area 1 Police Headquarters. It was a gray, imposing building that smelled of stale coffee and bureaucracy. Why are we here? Booker Mama asked, looking at the squad cars lined up in rows. Because, Mama, I said, turning off the engine. If we walk into that house now, it is just a family dispute. Kelvin calls the cops, they tell us to leave, and we spend 2 years in civil court trying to prove the deed is fake. But if we walk in there with the law behind us, it is a felony in progress. I am not looking for an apology. I am looking for handcuffs. I helped her out of the truck. She walked slowly, leaning on my arm, but her head was high. We walked through the double doors and the noise of the station hit us. Phones ringing, officers shouting names, the low hum of misery that hangs over every police station in America. We approached the front desk. A sergeant with tired eyes and a coffee stain on his shirt looked up. "Can I help you folks?" he asked. He looked at Mama like she was just another old lady coming to complain about noise in the neighborhood. "I am here to report a murder," I said. My voice was calm, level, and loud enough to cut through the noise of the room. The sergeant blinked. The room went quiet for a split second. "A murder," he repeated, leaning forward. "Who is the victim, sir?" "She is," I said, pointing to Mama Lucinda. The sergeant looked at me, then he looked at Mama, then back at me. His face hardened. He thought I was mocking him. He thought I was crazy. "Sir," he said, his voice dropping an octave, "this is a police station. If this is a joke, I suggest you turn around and walk out before I find a reason to put you in a holding cell." "It is not a joke," Mama said. Her voice was sharp enough to slice glass. "My son, Kelvin Ross, filed a death certificate for me 3 days ago. He held a funeral for me yesterday. He is currently selling my house. But as you can see, I am very much alive. Unless you are in the habit of talking to ghosts, Sergeant." She pulled her state ID out of her purse and slapped it onto the counter. It made a loud, definitive crack. The sergeant picked up the ID. He looked at the photo. He looked at Mama. He typed something into his computer. His eyebrows shot up. "I need a detective," I said. "Ideally one who specializes in fraud and identity theft. And I need him now." 10 minutes later, we were sitting in an interrogation room. It was a small, windowless box with a metal table and 3 chairs. The air was stuffy, but Mama didn't complain. She sat with her hands folded on her lap, perfectly composed. The door opened and a man walked in. He was tall, with graying hair at the temples, and he wore a suit that had seen better days. He introduced himself as Detective Harris. He looked like a man who had seen everything and was impressed by nothing. So he said, sitting down and opening a file, "The sergeant tells me you are dead, Mrs. Ross. He killed me on paper," Mama said, "to steal my house." Detective Harris looked at me. "Walk me through it, and start from the beginning." I didn't tell him a story. I gave him the evidence. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the file folder I had prepared. I laid the documents out on the metal table one by one like I was laying bricks for a foundation. "Exhibit A," I said, sliding a piece of paper across the table. "This is the death certificate Kelvin Ross filed on Tuesday. It states that Lucinda May Ross died of a stroke at Cook County Hospital at 8:42 p.m. Harris picked it up and scanned it. "Looks official," he grunted. "Exhibit B," I said, sliding the next document. "This is a medical report from Dr. Evans in Atlanta, Georgia. It is dated yesterday. It confirms that Lucinda Ross came in for a physical exam. Her heart rate was 72, and she is in excellent health for a woman of 94. Harris looked at the date, he looked at the death certificate, he looked at the medical report, he looked at Mama. "You were in Atlanta yesterday?" he asked. "I was eating peach cobbler in Atlanta yesterday," Mama said. Harris leaned back in his chair. He was interested now. The boredom was gone from his eyes, replaced by the sharp focus of a hunter. "So who died in Cook County Hospital?" he asked. "That is the question, isn't it?" I said. "My sources tell me it was a Jane Doe, a homeless woman. My brother identified her as his mother to claim the body and rush a cremation." "Jesus," Harris whispered. He rubbed his face with his hand. That is desecration. That is a Class X felony." "There is more," I said. I pulled out my laptop and opened the video file. "This was live-streamed yesterday," I said. Harris watched the screen. He watched Kelvin crying at the podium. He watched the brass urn sitting on the table. He watched Jessica collecting money from the neighbors. "He collected $3,000 in donations," I said, "and he took a $50,000 deposit on the house last night." Harris stood up. He walked to the door and poked his head out. "Get the DA on the phone," he shouted to someone in the hall. "Get him down here now. We have a situation." He came back and sat down. He looked at Mama with a new kind of respect. "Mrs. Ross." "I am sorry," he said. "I have seen kids steal from their parents before. I have seen forged checks. I have seen stolen jewelry, but I have never seen anyone steal a mother's death while she was still using her life." "He is not my son," Mama said. "Not anymore." Detective Harris looked at me. "Okay, Mr. Ross. We have enough here for an arrest warrant. We can pick him up right now. I will send a squad car to the house." "No," I said. Harris frowned. "No. If you arrest him now," I said, leaning forward, "you arrest him for filing a false instrument and maybe theft of the donation money. He makes bail in 24 hours. He claims it was a mistake. He claims grief made him crazy. He gets a lawyer and drags this out for 5 years. So what do you want to do?" Harris asked. I checked my watch. It was 11 in the morning. "At 2:00 this afternoon, he is signing the final deed transfer," I said. "The buyer is bringing the rest of the money, $600,000. "I want you to wait," I said. "I want you to walk in the door exactly when the pen leaves the paper. I want him to complete the transaction." Harris smiled. It was a slow, predatory smile. "You want grand larceny," he said. "You want fraud over $500,000. That is mandatory prison time. No probation." "Exactly," I said. "And I want one more thing." "What is that?" Harris asked. "I want to be the one to open the door," I said. Harris shook his head. "Civilians cannot be involved in a takedown, Mr. Ross. It is liability. It is dangerous." "He is not dangerous," I said. "He is a coward. And this is not just a takedown detective. This is a resurrection." My mother deserves to see the look on his face. She deserves to see him realize that he didn't just break the law, he broke the wrong family. Harris looked at Mama. She was staring at him with eyes that could melt steel. "Please, detective," she said. "He invited everyone to my funeral. It is only polite that I show up." Harris looked at the file again. He looked at the fake death certificate. He looked at the fake urn in the video. "Okay," he said, "but you stay behind me until the room is secured, and you do exactly what I say." "Understood," I said. Harris stood up and buttoned his jacket. I am going to get the warrants, he said. We have 3 hours. I need to verify the John Doe at the morgue to tack on the abuse of corpse charge. If that checks out, your brother is looking at 20 years minimum. He walked to the door and then stopped. Mr. Ross, he said. Yes, detective. You are a cold son of a bitch. I am an engineer, detective, I said. I just believe in structural integrity. When a building is rotten, you don't paint over it. You bring it down. Harris nodded and left the room. I looked at Mama. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her hand was warm. Are you ready, Mama? I asked. She took a deep breath. She reached into her purse and pulled out a tube of lipstick. She reapplied it carefully, using the reflection in the polished metal table. I have been ready since Tuesday, Booker, she said. Let's go take him to school. We sat in that interrogation room for another hour, while the machinery of justice ground into gear around us. I could hear the officers outside talking about the case. Word had spread. The man who faked his mother's death. The woman who came back to life. We were already a legend in the precinct. At 1 o'clock, Harris came back. He had a team with him, 2 uniformed officers and another detective. It is a go, Harris said. The morgue confirmed it. An unidentified female body was released to Kelvin Ross on Tuesday night. Cremated Wednesday morning. We have him on everything, Mr. Ross. Fraud, forgery, larceny, desecration. He handed me a bulletproof vest. Put this on, he said, just in case. I put it on under my jacket. It was heavy and uncomfortable, but it felt like armor. I handed one to Mama, but Harris shook his head. She stays in the car until the scene is safe, he said. No, Mama said. Mrs. Ross. Harris started. I am 94 years old, Mama said, standing up. If the Lord hasn't taken me yet, Kelvin Ross certainly isn't going to do it. I am walking into my house on my own 2 feet. Harris looked at me for help. I just shrugged. You don't know her like I do, detective, I said. You can arrest her or you can let her walk, but you are not stopping her. Harris sighed. Fine, but you stay behind the big guy. He pointed to the largest uniformed officer. We walked out to the parking lot. The sun had come out, but it didn't provide any warmth. It was a cold, sharp light that revealed every crack in the pavement. We got into the unmarked police car. Harris drove. I sat in the front, Mama in the back. We drove in silence down the Dan Ryan toward the south side. The city flew past us. The familiar landmarks of my childhood. The park where I learned to play baseball. The corner store where I bought candy. We turned onto King Drive. The street was lined with trees, their leaves turning gold and brown. There it was. 4522. The house looked exactly the same as I remembered. The red brick was strong and solid. The porch was swept clean. But in the front yard there was a sign. Sold. Century Holdings. There were 3 cars in the driveway, a black Mercedes which I assumed belonged to the lawyer, Kelvin's beat-up sedan, and a shiny new Lexus that probably belonged to the real estate agent. They are all there, Harris said into his radio. All units hold position. Wait for the signal. He parked the car 2 houses down. Here's the plan, Harris said. We wait for the notary to arrive. Once she goes in, we know the signing is happening. We give them 10 minutes. Then we breach. I watched the house. I saw the curtain move in the living room window. I saw Jessica's face for a brief second. She was looking out, checking the street. She looked impatient. 5 minutes later, a small sedan pulled up. A woman with a notary bag got out and walked up the steps. That is it, Harris said. The notary is in. The clock is ticking. I felt my heart rate slow down. This was it. The moment of impact. I looked back at Mama. She was clutching her purse. Her eyes were closed and her lips were moving. She was praying. For mercy, Mama, I asked quietly. No, she said, opening her eyes. For aim. Harris looked at his watch. Time to go, he said. He opened the car door. The cold air rushed in. I stepped out onto the sidewalk. The leaves crunched under my boots. I buttoned my jacket over the vest. I adjusted my tie. I wasn't Booker the brother anymore. I wasn't Booker the son. I was the wrecking ball. Let's go say hello, I said. We walked toward the house flanked by the officers. The street was quiet. A dog barked in the distance. Inside that house, they were passing pens and shaking hands. Inside that house, they were celebrating their victory. They didn't hear the footsteps on the porch. They didn't hear the storm gathering on the doorstep. I reached for the doorknob. It was locked, of course. I looked at Harris. He nodded to the uniformed officer who was holding a battering ram. But I shook my head. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a key, my father's key, the one I had kept on my ring for 20 years, the one Kelvin thought I had lost. I slid it into the lock. It turned with a smooth, silent click. Some things I thought as I pushed the door open you just can't forge. The door swung open, and we stepped into the light. The office of the district commander was on the top floor of the precinct, and it smelled of old cigar smoke and lemon furniture polish. It was the kind of room that was designed to intimidate people, but I was not intimidated. I was focused. Detective Harris had led us up there because he said there was someone who needed to see this personally, someone who knew my father. When the heavy oak door opened, a large man in a white dress shirt with gold stars on his collar stood up from behind a massive mahogany desk. He was a mountain of a man with skin the color of deep mahogany and hair that had turned the color of steel wool. Commander Silas Johnson. I remembered him. 40 years ago, he was just a skinny rookie walking the beat on 35th Street. My father, Big Walter, used to let him sit on our porch during the hot summer nights and drink iced tea. My father had vouched for him when he applied for the sergeant's exam. My father had loaned him $500 to buy his first car so he wouldn't have to take the bus to the academy. Silas looked at me, and then he looked at the woman holding my arm. His eyes went wide. He dropped the pen he was holding. "Ms. Lucinda," he whispered. "Hello, Silas," Mama said. Her voice was steady, but I could feel her trembling slightly. It wasn't fear. It was the adrenaline of the moment. "You are looking well. You finally grew into those ears of yours." Silas came around the desk. He moved fast for a big man. He ignored me completely and took Mama's hand in both of his. He looked like he was seeing a miracle or a ghost, and I suppose in a way he was seeing both. I heard you passed," he stammered. "I saw the obituary. I was going to come to the service yesterday, but we had a double homicide in Englewood. Ms. Lucinda, I am so sorry I wasn't there." "You didn't miss much," Silas' Mama said, pulling her hand back. "Just a lot of lies and a brass pot full of a stranger's ashes." Silas frowned. He looked at me for the first time. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by the hard, cold stare of a career lawman. "Booker," he said, nodding at me, "it has been a long time. What is going on here? Why is your mother standing in my office when the state of Illinois says she is dead?" I walked over to his desk and laid the file down. It made a heavy thud. "Because my brother Kelvin is a thief and a liar," I said. "And because you are the only man in this building I trust to handle what needs to be done next." Silas opened the file. I watched his face as he read. I watched the muscle in his jaw jump as he looked at the death certificate. I saw his fist clench as he looked at the photos of the estate sale. I saw the veins in his neck bulge as he read the report about the John Doe body stolen from the morgue. By the time he finished reading, the silence in the room was thick enough to choke on. He stood up slowly. He walked over to the window and looked out at the city. Then he turned around and his face was a mask of pure fury. He did this, he asked. His voice was low, a rumble of thunder before the storm. "Kelvin did this. To Big Walter's wife." "He did," I said. "He burned a homeless woman and put her in a jar so he could sell the house Walter built with his own hands." "Yes." Silas walked back to his desk and slammed his hand down on the intercom button. The sound was like a gunshot. "Harris," he roared, "get the TAC team ready. I want 6 units. I want the Ram. I want shotguns. We are going to 4522 South King Drive, and we are going to drag that son of a bitch out by his ankles." He grabbed his radio from his belt. "All units, this is Commander Johnson. I want a perimeter around." I reached out and put my hand over his. "Silas, stop," I said. He looked at me like I was crazy. "Stop, Booker. He faked a death. He desecrated a corpse. He is selling your mother's house right now. I am going to go down there, and I am going to bury him under the jail." "Sit down, Silas," I said. "He is my brother, but he is a criminal, Booker. I know what he is. But I am asking you as a structural engineer and as the son of the man who helped you buy your first car. Sit down and listen to me." Silas hesitated. He looked at Mama. She nodded. "Listen to him, Silas. He has a plan." Silas slowly lowered the radio. He sat down heavily in his chair. "Talk fast, Booker," he said. "My blood is boiling. If you go in there now," I said, keeping my voice calm and analytical, "you arrest him for what? Filing a false instrument, identity theft, maybe fraud, but the house hasn't been sold yet. The deed hasn't been transferred. The big money hasn't changed hands." So what Silas asked. "It is still a felony. It is a Class 3 felony," I said. "With a good lawyer, and trust me, His wife Jessica will hire the best. He will plead it down. He will say he was confused by grief. He will say it was a clerical error at the hospital. He will say he thought the body was Mama. He will get probation. 2 years, maybe 3. He will walk away, Silas, and in 5 years he will do it again to someone else. I leaned across the desk. But if we wait, Silas narrowed his eyes. Wait for what? The closing is at 2:00, I said, checking my watch. The buyer is bringing a cashier's check for $600,000. Kelvin is going to sign the deed. The moment his pen leaves the paper and he touches that check, it is no longer just fraud. It is grand larceny over $500,000. It is theft by deception of a major asset. It is a Class X felony. I paused to let the legal weight of that sink in. Mandatory minimum of 6 years, I said. Maximum of 30. No probation. No plea deals. If we catch him holding the check, he goes away for the rest of his life. Silas stared at me. He was processing the strategy. He was a cop, but he was also a man who understood the streets. He understood that sometimes you have to let the bad guy hang himself before you cut the rope. You want to entrap him? Silas said. I don't want to entrap him, I said. I want him to finish what he started. I want him to be fully committed. I want there to be absolutely no doubt in the eyes of a jury that his intent was to steal everything. Silas looked at the file again. He picked up the photo of Jessica toasting with the champagne. And the wife, he asked. She is the brain, I said. She is the one pushing the pen. If we go in now, she claims she was a victim too. She claims Kelvin lied to her. But if she is sitting there counting the money, she goes down with him. Silas nodded slowly. A grim smile spread across his face. You are your father's son, Booker. Walter always did play the long game. He checked the clock on the wall. It was 1:15. We have 45 minutes, Silas said. He stood up and walked over to a locker in the corner of the room. He pulled out a heavy tactical vest. He wasn't just sending his men, he was going himself. I owe your father a debt, Silas said, strapping the vest on over his white shirt. When I was a rookie, I made a mistake. A bad one. I almost lost my badge. Your daddy stood up for me when no one else would. He told the captain that I was a good man who just needed guidance. He saved my career, Booker. He picked up his service weapon and checked the chamber. I swore on his grave that I would always look out for his family. I guess I failed with Kelvin, but I'm not going to fail Ms. Lucinda. He looked at Mama. Ms. Lucinda, I need you to stay here. It could get ugly. Mama stood up. She smoothed her dress. Silas Johnson, she said, and her voice had the same tone she used when he was 20 years old and she caught him smoking on her porch. Do you really think I came all the way from Atlanta to sit in a police station while you handle my business? Silas sighed. He looked at me. Can you control her, Booker? I laughed. A short, dry laugh. Has anyone ever controlled her, Silas? Silas shook his head. Fair point. Okay, he said. But she stays in the car until the cuffs are on. I mean it, Booker. If Kelvin sees her before the arrest, he might do something stupid. He might try to run. He might try to hurt someone. A cornered rat bites. Agreed, I said. Silas hit the intercom again. Harris, he barked. Get the unmarked vans. No sirens. We are doing a silent approach. I want the perimeter set in 20 minutes. We wait for the signal. What is the signal? Harris's voice crackled back. The signal, I said, stepping toward the intercom, is when the notary leaves. Once the notary walks out that door, the deal is done. The papers are signed. That is when we breach. Copy that, Harris said. Silas looked at me. He held out his hand. It was a massive hand, calloused and strong. Let's go get your house back, he said. I shook his hand. It felt like shaking hands with a mountain. Thank you, Silas, I said. Don't thank me yet, he said. Thank me when that boy is in an orange jumpsuit. We walked out of the office and down the hallway. The station was buzzing with activity, but for me the world had narrowed down to a single point. A house on King Drive. A signature on a page. And the look on my brother's face when he realizes that the ghost of his past has come back to haunt him, not with chains and moans, but with a badge and a warrant. I helped Mama into the elevator. She held her head high. Are you nervous, Mama? I asked as the doors closed. She looked at her reflection in the polished steel doors. Nervous, she said. No, Booker. I am impatient. I have a house to clean and I can't start until the trash is taken out. I watched the numbers on the elevator panel count down. 3, 2, 1. The ground floor. The countdown had begun. Kelvin had 45 minutes of freedom left. 45 minutes to think he was rich. 45 minutes to think he was smart. He didn't know it yet, but his lease on freedom had just expired, and the eviction team was on the way. The surveillance van was parked 3 houses down from 4522 South King Drive. It was a nondescript gray utility vehicle, the kind used by plumbers or electricians, but the inside was like the cockpit of a spaceship. Monitors glowed with green and blue light, and the air was thick with the hum of cooling fans and the crackle of radio static. I sat on a narrow metal bench, my eyes fixed on the video feed coming from the pinhole camera Reynolds had managed to plant in the curtain rod of the living room window earlier that morning. Commander Silas Johnson sat next to me, his massive arms crossed over his tactical vest, his face set in a grim mask of anticipation. Mama Lucinda was in the back of the van, sitting straight up on a swivel chair, refusing to lean back, refusing to look away from the screen. She was watching the final act of a tragedy she had written herself. Inside the house, the stage was set for the execution of a legacy. Kelvin and Jessica were sitting on the velvet sofa my father had bought in 1975. But they didn't look like people who belonged in that house. They looked like invaders. They looked like parasites who had grown too fat on their host. Jessica was wearing a white suit that I recognized immediately. It was designer, probably Italian, and it likely cost more than the roof repairs I had paid for last winter. She was wearing pearls that were too large to be real, and her hair was styled in a way that screamed new money. She looked like she was dressed for a yacht party, not a real estate closing. Kelvin sat next to her. He was wearing a brand new navy blue suit with a silk tie that was a little too bright. But unlike his wife, Kelvin did not look triumphant. He looked like a man who was waiting for the executioner's axe to fall. He was sweating. I could see the sheen of perspiration on his forehead even through the grainy video feed. His leg was bouncing up and down, a nervous tic he had developed when we were children whenever he had done something wrong and was waiting for Mama to find out. Across from them sat Marcus Thorne, the developer, and his attorney, a man named Mr. Sterling, who looked like he billed by the second. Between them on the coffee table lay a stack of documents 3 inches thick, and on top of that stack sat a single envelope. We all knew what was in the envelope: the cashier's check, the balance of the sale, $550,000. I adjusted the volume on the headset. The audio was crystal clear. So Mr. Ross, the attorney, said, pushing a document across the table, "We just need a few more signatures here. This is the final affidavit of title confirming that there are no other heirs and no other claims on the property." Kelvin reached for the pen. His hand was shaking so badly that he dropped it. It clattered onto the glass surface of the coffee table. "Sorry," Kelvin mumbled, picking it up. "Just nerves. It is a big day." Jessica reached over and placed her hand on his knee. It looked like a gesture of comfort, but I knew better. I saw her fingers dig into his flesh. It was a warning. "Get it together, baby," she purred. Her voice was smooth, but her eyes were hard as diamonds. "You are doing great. Think about Paris. Think about the view from the balcony." "I don't know, Jess," Kelvin whispered. He looked around the room. He looked at the piano in the corner. He looked at the photos on the mantel that Jessica hadn't thrown away yet. "This feels fast. Maybe we should have waited a week, just to be sure Booker doesn't call." Jessica's smile tightened. She leaned in close so the lawyer wouldn't hear, but the microphone picked up every venomous syllable. "Booker is an old fool," she hissed. "He is sitting in Atlanta crying into his tea." He signed the waiver, Kelvin. "It is done. Don't you dare get cold feet now. Do you want to go back to dodging calls from your bookie? Do you want to lose this house to debt? Or do you want to be free?" Kelvin swallowed hard. He looked at the envelope on the table. The greed was warring with his conscience, and I watched the battle play out on his face. He was a weak man. He had always been a weak man. He wanted the prize, but he didn't want the guilt. But Jessica knew exactly which buttons to push. "Sign it," she ordered. Kelvin took a deep breath. He gripped the pen until his knuckles turned white. "Okay," he said. "Let's do this." He bent over the paper. I watched the pen touch the page. Silas shifted in his seat beside me. "Is that it?" he asked. "Is that the crime?" "Not yet," I said, holding up a hand. "Intent isn't enough, Silas. He has to take the money. He has to exchange the deed for the cash. That is the moment of theft." I watched my brother sign his name, Kelvin Ross. Then he signed it again on the next page. And again. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was rhythmic and final. With every signature, he was severing a tie to his past. With every signature, he was hammering a nail into his own coffin. Thorne, the developer, was smiling. He was thinking about the 6 condos he was going to build on this lot. He was thinking about the profit margin. He didn't care about the history of the walls he was about to tear down. "Excellent," the attorney said, gathering the papers. He checked the signatures. "Everything looks in order. The deed is transferred. The property is yours, Mr. Thorne." Thorne reached for the envelope. "Here is the balance," he said, handing it to Kelvin. $550,000. Certified funds. Kelvin took the envelope. He held it in his hands like it was a holy relic. He opened the flap and pulled out the check. He stared at the numbers. His eyes went wide. The shaking in his hands stopped, replaced by the narcotic high of sudden wealth. "Oh my God," he whispered. "It is real. It is real," baby Jessica squealed. She grabbed the check from him and kissed it. "We are rich. We are actually rich." Silas looked at me. "Now?" he asked. "Now," I said. Silas grabbed his radio. "All units move in. Breach, breach, breach." I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but my mind was clear. I looked at Mama. "Stay here, Mama," I said. "Give us 2 minutes to secure the room. Then you come in." She nodded. Her eyes were fixed on the screen where Kelvin and Jessica were hugging each other, jumping up and down in a grotesque dance of celebration. "Go get him, Booker," she said. I jumped out of the van and ran toward the house. I was 73 years old, but I ran with the speed of a man half my age. The adrenaline was a powerful drug. Around me, the street erupted into chaos. Unmarked vans slid open, and tactical officers poured out in black vests. Commander Silas Johnson was leading the charge, his service weapon drawn but held low. We hit the porch just as the laughter inside reached its peak. I could hear Jessica's voice through the door. "Champagne," she was yelling. "Open another bottle. We are going to drink until we pass out." I reached the door. I didn't need the battering ram. I had the key. My father's key. I slotted it into the lock. It turned smoothly. Silas looked at me and nodded. I kicked the door open. The sound was like a thunderclap. The heavy oak door slammed against the wall, shaking the pictures on the mantel. The scene inside froze instantly. Kelvin was standing in the middle of the room holding a bottle of Dom Perignon. Jessica was holding the check. Thorne and the lawyer were shaking hands. They all turned to look at the door. For a second, they didn't understand what they were seeing. They saw a wall of black vests. They saw the glint of badges. And in the center of it all, they saw me. Booker Kelvin stammered. The bottle slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor, exploding in a spray of foam and glass. "Hello, brother," I said, stepping into the room. Kelvin's face went pale. All the blood drained out of him, leaving him looking like gray wax. He looked at me, then he looked at the police, then he looked back at me. What are you doing here?" he whispered. "You are supposed to be in Atlanta. And you are supposed to be grieving," I said, pointing to the shattered champagne bottle. Jessica reacted faster. She shoved the check behind her back. "This is a private residence," she screamed, trying to summon her outrage. "You can't just barge in here. Who do you think you are?" Commander Silas Johnson stepped forward. He seemed to fill the entire room. "I am the police, Mrs. Ross," he boomed, his voice shaking the rafters. "And this is a crime scene." Kelvin took a step back, knocking over a chair. "Crime scene," he squeaked. "What crime? We just sold the house. It is legal. I have the papers." "You sold a house that doesn't belong to you," Silas said. "It does belong to me," Kelvin yelled, his voice rising in panic. "My mother is dead. I am the heir. I have the death certificate. I looked at my watch. The timing was perfect." "Actually, Kelvin," I said, my voice deadly calm. "That is the part you got wrong." I stepped aside. The front door opened again. The officers parted, making a path. And Mama Lucinda walked in. She wasn't using a cane. She wasn't holding anyone's arm. She was walking under her own power, wearing her red dress and her Sunday hat. She walked into that room like a queen returning to reclaim her throne from a band of usurpers. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. It was a silence so heavy it felt like it had mass. Kelvin's eyes bulged out of his head. He made a sound like a dying animal, a high-pitched wheeze of terror. He backed away until he hit the wall, and then he slid down it, his legs giving out completely. "Mama," he whispered. Jessica dropped the check. It fluttered to the floor, landing in the puddle of spilled champagne. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked like a fish pulled out of water. Thorne, the developer, looked from Mama to Kelvin and then to the check on the floor. He realized instantly what had happened. He grabbed his briefcase and backed away toward the corner, trying to make himself invisible. Mama stopped in the center of the room. She looked down at Kelvin cowering on the floor. She didn't look angry. She looked disappointed. And that was far worse. "Hello, Kelvin," she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried to every corner of the room. Mama Kelvin cried, tears streaming down his face. "Mama, I thought you were dead." Mama finished the sentence for him. "You thought I was dead because you signed a paper saying I was. You thought I was dead because you burned a stranger's body and put it in a jar." She walked over to the table and picked up the brass urn. She held it up. "Who is in here, Kelvin?" she asked. "Who did you burn?" Kelvin couldn't speak. He was sobbing now, rocking back and forth. "It was a mistake," he blubbered. "It was a mistake." "No," Mama said, setting the urn down hard. "A mistake is forgetting to take out the trash." This, she swept her hand around the room at the champagne, at the contract, at the check soaking on the floor. "This is a betrayal." She turned to Jessica. Jessica had backed up against the fireplace. She was shaking her head. "I didn't know," she stammered. "He told me you were dead. I swear I believed him." I laughed. It was a cold, harsh sound. "Save it, Jessica," I said. "We have the emails, we have the texts, we have the video of you toasting to the jackpot. You aren't a victim. You are the mastermind." Silas stepped forward. He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metal clicked ominously. "Kelvin Ross, Jessica Ross," he said. "You are under arrest for grand larceny, forgery, abuse of a corpse, and conspiracy to commit fraud." Kelvin scrambled to his knees. He reached out toward Mama. "Mama, please, tell them it is a misunderstanding. I am your son. You can't let them take me." Mama looked down at him. She looked at the hand reaching for her skirt. The same hand that had signed the deed 5 minutes ago. "I don't have a son named Kelvin," she said. "My son Kelvin died the day he decided a pile of money was worth more than his mother's life." She turned her back on him. "Take him away, Silas." 2 officers grabbed Kelvin. He screamed as they hauled him up. He kicked and thrashed, screaming for mercy, screaming for his lawyer, screaming for his mother. But Mama didn't turn around. She stood still as a statue, watching the developer cower in the corner. Jessica didn't scream. She tried to run. She made a break for the back door, but Reynolds was waiting there. He stepped out of the kitchen, blocking her path. "Going somewhere, Mrs. Ross?" he asked, smiling. She hissed at him like a cornered cat, but the officers were on her in seconds. They cuffed her hands behind her back. As they dragged her past me, she spat in my direction. "You old bastard," she screamed. "You ruined everything." "I ruined nothing, Jessica," I said calmly, wiping the spittle from my jacket. "I just inspected the foundation, and I found it wanting." They dragged them out the front door. I watched through the window as they were shoved into the back of separate squad cars. The neighbors had gathered outside, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Gable was there. Deacon Miller was there. They watched as the man who had scammed them at the funeral yesterday was hauled away in chains. The room was suddenly quiet. Thorne, the developer, cleared his throat. I didn't know," he said, holding up his hands. "I am a victim here too. I am out 50 grand. Silas looked at him. "Pick up your check," Silas said, pointing to the wet piece of paper on the floor. "And get out. If I ever see you in this neighborhood again trying to buy a house from a grieving family, I will look into your permits so deep you won't be able to build a doghouse in this city. Do you understand?" Thorne nodded frantically. He grabbed the soggy check and ran out the door. I looked at Mama. She was standing in the middle of the room looking at the empty space on the wall where a picture used to hang. "Are you okay, Mama?" I asked. She took a deep breath. She looked around the room. It smelled of expensive champagne and cheap greed. "Open the windows, Booker," she said. I walked over and threw the windows open. The cold, fresh air of Chicago rushed in, blowing away the stale scent of the perfume Jessica wore. She walked over to the sofa and sat down. She looked tired. She looked older than she had this morning. But she also looked clean. "It is over, Mama," I said, sitting down beside her. "No, Booker," she said, looking at the door where the police had just exited. "It is not over. We have to clean this mess up. We have to find out who that poor woman in the urn was, and we have to bury her properly." I nodded. "Of course." "But first," she said, leaning back and closing her eyes. "First I want a cup of tea. In my own kitchen. In my own house. I stood up. I will put the kettle on, Mama. I walked into the kitchen. It was messy. There were empty wine bottles on the counter. But as I filled the kettle with water, I felt a sense of peace settling over me. The structure had held. The storm had passed. The damage was severe, but the foundation was still standing. And that was all that mattered. The ink was less than a millimeter from the paper. I could see it from the doorway, a tiny black drop of liquid potential energy, waiting to become kinetic, waiting to transform a legacy into a transaction. Kelvin's hand was trembling, not with hesitation, but with the vibrato of a junkie about to get his fix. The tip of the pen hovered over the signature line, that sacred space where a man gives his word. But Kelvin had no word to give. He had sold it years ago for a losing hand of poker. I stood on the other side of the heavy oak door, my hands gripping the rubber handles of the wheelchair. Mama Lucinda sat below me. She was small in the chair, her frame hidden beneath a heavy shawl, her head bowed slightly under the brim of her Sunday hat. We had decided on the wheelchair at the last minute. It was a tactical choice. It was theater. We wanted them to see frailty before they felt the force. We wanted them to underestimate the structural integrity of the woman they had tried to erase. Commander Silas Johnson and his team were pressed against the brick walls on either side of the porch, silent as shadows, weapons drawn but held low. They were the hammer, but we were the needle. And the needle had to go in first. I nodded to Reynolds, who was crouched by the lock. He didn't need a battering ram. He reached up and turned the handle. The door was unlocked. They were so confident, so arrogant in their victory that they hadn't even bothered to bolt the door against the world. I took a deep breath. The air tasted of autumn leaves and impending justice. I pushed. The door didn't bang open. It swung wide with a slow, ominous creak, a sound that seemed to stretch out and fill the entire house. I pushed the wheelchair over the threshold. The rubber tires hummed softly on the hardwood floor, a sound I had heard 1,000 times in hospitals and nursing homes, usually signaling the end of something. But today it signaled the beginning. I stopped the chair right at the edge of the living room rug. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, a 73-year-old man in a black suit standing behind a 94-year-old woman in a wheelchair blocking the light from the hallway. The room froze. It didn't just go quiet. The physics of the room seemed to stop. The dust motes dancing in the sunbeams hung suspended in the air. Kelvin was the first to react. The pen slipped from his fingers. It didn't fall like a pen. It fell like a gavel. It hit the glass coffee table with a sharp clack that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. It rolled across the glass and dropped to the floor, spinning to a stop near his polished shoe. He looked up. His eyes didn't register recognition at first. They registered confusion. His brain was trying to reconcile two opposing realities. In one reality, he had a death certificate in his pocket and a check for $500,000 on the table. In the other reality, his dead mother was sitting 10 feet away from him. Jessica was faster. She was standing behind the sofa, a glass of champagne halfway to her lips. The glass slipped. It tumbled through the air end over end, spilling expensive golden bubbles before shattering on the floor. She didn't look at the glass. She looked at the wheelchair. Her face, which moments ago had been flushed with the excitement of wealth, drained of color so instantly it looked like the blood had been siphoned out of her. Her mouth opened a perfect circle of horror. Her lipstick, a bright, aggressive red, stood out against her pale skin like a wound. Ma, she stammered. It wasn't a word. It was a gasp. It was the sound of a nightmare manifesting in the waking world. Thorne, the developer, looked from the door to Kelvin. He looked annoyed. He thought this was some elderly relative crashing the party, some senile aunt who hadn't gotten the memo. "Who is this?" Thorne asked, his voice breaking the spell. "Kelvin, get rid of them. We are in the middle of a closing." Kelvin didn't move. He couldn't move. He was paralyzed by a terror that went deeper than law. It was the primal terror of a child caught in the ultimate sin. He was staring at the hat. He was staring at the hands resting on the shawl. He knew those hands. He had seen them wring out washcloths. He had seen them hold a Bible. He had seen them count pennies to buy him school shoes. "Mama," Kelvin whispered. His voice was a high, thin reed. Mama Lucinda didn't look up. Not yet. She sat perfectly still, letting the silence stretch, letting the tension build until it felt like the walls were bending inward. Then slowly, deliberately, she reached up and removed her hat. She placed it on her lap. She lifted her head. Her eyes were clear. There was no cloud of dementia. There was no fog of age. There was only the cold, hard steel of a woman who had survived the Great Depression, the Jim Crow South, and the death of a husband only to be betrayed by the fruit of her own womb. She gripped the armrests of the wheelchair. Jessica let out a small whimper and took a step back, her heels clicking on the floor. She grabbed the back of the sofa for support. She was shaking her head back and forth, a erratic, jerky motion. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no. You're dead. We burned you." Mama pushed down on the armrests. I stepped forward to help her to offer my hand, but she waved me off. She didn't need my help. Not for this. This was something she had to do alone. She rose. It wasn't a quick movement. It was a geological event. It was like watching a mountain rise from the sea. Her knees shook slightly, but she locked them. She straightened her back. She stood up to her full height, which was barely 5 feet 2 inches, but in that moment she looked 10 feet tall. She took one step forward, then another. She walked away from the safety of the wheelchair, standing unsupported in the center of the room on the very rug where Kelvin had popped his champagne. She lifted her hand, one finger pointing straight out. It wasn't shaking. It was as steady as a compass needle pointing north. It pointed directly at the space between Kelvin's eyes. The room was so quiet I could hear the lawyer's watch ticking. "Tao nganai. Me vu huatiu tao ha kontrai. I heard you just cremated me son." The words hung in the air, heavy and toxic. They weren't shouted. They were spoken with a conversational calmness that was far more terrifying than any scream. Kelvin's knees gave out. He didn't faint. He just collapsed. He slid out of the chair and hit the floor hard, landing on his knees in a posture of prayer. He looked up at her, tears instantly streaming down his face, mixing with the sweat of his greed. "Mama," he choked out. "Mama, I can explain." "You can explain?" Mama asked. She took another step closer. "You can explain why I am standing here breathing while you are sitting there holding a check for my house. You can explain why you put a stranger in an oven and told the world it was me. I... Kelvin stammered. He looked at Jessica for help, but Jessica was useless. She was pressed against the wall, her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide and unblinking. She looked like she was witnessing the apocalypse. Thorne stood up, slowly grabbing his briefcase. He was pale. He realized now. He realized he wasn't dealing with a senile aunt. He was dealing with the owner. The alive, breathing, furious owner. "This is fraud," Thorne whispered to his lawyer. "This is massive fraud. Get the check. Get the check back." The lawyer reached for the check on the table, but I stepped forward. I moved fast for an old man. I slammed my hand down on the envelope before he could touch it. "Leave it," I said. My voice was low, a rumble from the chest. "That is evidence." The lawyer snatched his hand back as if he had touched a hot stove. He looked at me, then at Mama, then at Kelvin on the floor. He started packing his papers frantically, shoving documents into his bag with shaking hands. "We didn't know," the lawyer said, his voice rising in panic. "We acted in good faith. We were provided with a certified death certificate. We are victims here. Tell it to the judge," I said. Mama didn't look at the lawyer. She didn't look at the developer. Her eyes never left Kelvin. "Get up," she commanded. Kelvin tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't work. He crawled toward her. He actually crawled. It was a pathetic, disgusting sight. He reached out to grab the hem of her dress, the red dress she wore to celebrations. "Don't you touch me," Mama said. Her voice cracked like a whip. Kelvin froze his hand, hovering inches from the fabric. "I raised you to be a man," Mama said. "I worked double shifts scrubbing floors so you could have clean clothes. Your father broke his back in that mill so you could go to school. And this is how you pay us back. By burying me before I'm dead. By selling the roof over my head for a gambling debt." "It wasn't me," Kelvin wailed, pointing a shaking finger at Jessica. "It was her. She made me do it. She said you were old. She said you wouldn't know. She handled the paperwork." Jessica let out a screech. "You lying coward. You told me she was sick. You told me it was for the best. Don't you dare pin this on me." They started screaming at each other. The veneer of their sophisticated, loving marriage dissolved instantly into a puddle of accusations and hate. They looked like rats fighting over a scrap of meat on a sinking ship. Mama just watched them. She watched them tear each other apart with a look of profound sorrow. This was her victory, but it was also her tragedy. She was watching the final death of her family, not the physical death they had planned for her, but the moral death of the son she had loved. "Enough," I shouted. The room went silent again. I looked at Mama. She nodded. She was tired. The adrenaline was fading and the weight of the moment was settling on her shoulders. "Call them in, Booker," she said softly. I'm done looking at him. I turned toward the open door and raised my hand. Commander Silas Johnson stepped into the frame. He didn't look like a friend of the family today. He looked like the wrath of God. Behind him, 4 tactical officers flowed into the room like black water, their presence filling every corner, blocking every exit. Kelvin looked at the police. He looked at the handcuffs on Silas's belt. He looked at the check on the table. And then he did something that broke my heart one last time. He didn't reach for Mama. He didn't reach for his wife. He lunged for the check. It was instinct. It was the muscle memory of an addict. Even with his mother standing there, even with the police in the room, his brain saw that envelope as the only life raft in the ocean. He grabbed the envelope and scrambled toward the back door. It was a foolish, desperate move. Silas didn't even draw his weapon. He just stepped forward and kicked Kelvin's legs out from under him. Kelvin hit the floor face first. The envelope skidded across the hardwood, sliding until it stopped right at the toe of Mama's shoe. Officers swarmed him. Hands were wrenched behind backs. Cuffs clicked. The sounds of struggle were brief and violent. Jessica tried to run toward the kitchen, her heels slipping on the spilled champagne. Reynolds stepped out from the hallway, blocking her path with a grim smile. 2 officers grabbed her arms. She screamed a high, piercing sound that shattered the last of the dignity in the room. I looked at Mama. She hadn't flinched. She looked down at the envelope at her feet. She bent down slowly, painfully, and picked it up. She held it in her hand. $550,000, the price of her life. She looked at Kelvin, who was now pressed against the floor, a knee in his back, his face mashed against the wood. "You wanted this so bad," Mama said, her voice trembling with tears for the first time. "You wanted it more than you wanted me." She ripped the envelope in half, then in half again. She let the pieces fall like snow onto his head. "Take him away, Silas," she said. As they dragged him out, he stopped screaming. He just looked at her, his eyes dead and empty. He knew. He finally knew that there was no coming back from this. He hadn't just lost a house. He had lost his name. I walked over to Mama and put my hands on her shoulders. She was shaking now. The adrenaline was gone, leaving behind the cold reality of what had just happened. "Sit down, Mama," I said gently. "I'll get the wheelchair." "No," she said. She took a deep breath and straightened her spine again. "I walked in here on my own 2 feet, Booker, and I'm going to stand in my own house." She looked at the lawyer and the developer who were huddled in the corner, terrified. "Get out," she said. They didn't need to be told twice. They ran out the door, past the police, past the neighbors gathering on the lawn, running from the judgment of a 94-year-old woman in a red dress. I looked around the room. It was a mess. But it was our mess. The parasites were gone. The infection had been cut out. I smiled. It was a sad smile, but it was real. "Welcome home, Mama," I said. She looked at me and a single tear rolled down her cheek. "It's good to be back, son. Now go put the kettle on. I need to wash the taste of this betrayal out of my mouth. I have seen men break under pressure before. In my line of work, I have seen seasoned construction foremen weep when a deadline was missed and millions of dollars were on the line. I have seen soldiers in Vietnam lose their minds when the jungle became too quiet, but I have never seen a human being dismantle their own sanity in real time quite like my brother Kelvin did in that living room. Most people, when caught red-handed in a crime of this magnitude, would collapse. They would beg for forgiveness. They would plead insanity. They would fall to their knees and grasp for the hem of their mother's dress, hoping that the maternal instinct would override the law. But Kelvin Ross was not most people. And he was not just a criminal, he was a narcissist who had convinced himself that his version of reality was the only one that mattered. He looked at Mama Lucinda standing there in her red dress, breathing, blinking, and radiating disappointment. And instead of seeing his mother, he saw a glitch in his matrix. He saw an obstacle that needed to be removed. He scrambled backward on the floor, his heels slipping on the polished wood until his back hit the legs of the velvet sofa. He reached into his jacket pocket with a frantic, jerky motion. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was crumpled and stained with sweat, but he smoothed it out on his knee with trembling hands. "No," he shouted. His voice was not the voice of a man. It was the shriek of a cornered animal. "This is not real. You are not real." He held the paper up toward Commander Silas Johnson. He shook it so hard it made a snapping sound. "Officer, look. Look at this. I have the certificate. It is from the state of Illinois. It has the seal. It says, Lucinda Ross is dead. He pointed a shaking finger at Mama. That woman is a fraud. That is not my mother. My mother died on Tuesday. I saw the body. I identified her. This is a trick. The room went deadly silent. Even the police officers looked uncomfortable. There is something deeply disturbing about watching a man deny the existence of the woman who gave birth to him while she is staring him in the face. Booker did this. Kelvin screamed, turning his wild eyes toward me. He pointed at me, his face twisted into a mask of pure hate. He hired her. He went out and found some old senile woman who looks like Mom. He dressed her up. He is trying to steal my inheritance. I stood there, my hands clasped behind my back, watching him. I felt a deep cold pit open in my stomach. It wasn't anger anymore, it was pity. He was so far gone, so consumed by his greed that he was willing to erase his mother's existence right to her face rather than admit he was wrong. Kelvin, I said, my voice low and steady. You need to stop. You are embarrassing yourself, and you are breaking her heart. I am not the one embarrassing myself, he yelled. He tried to stand up, but his legs were shaking too much, so he stayed on his knees, clutching the death certificate like a holy shield. I have the paperwork. The law says she is dead. If the law says she is dead, then she is dead. This woman is an imposter. She is an actress. He looked at the developer, Marcus Thorne, who was pressed into the corner of the room, clutching his briefcase to his chest. Mr. Thorne, don't listen to them, Kelvin pleaded. We have a deal. You gave me the check. The house is yours. Just tell the police to get these trespassers out of here so we can finish. Thorne looked at Kelvin, and then he looked at Mama Lucinda. Thorne was a businessman. He dealt in concrete and steel. He knew what was real. And looking at the 94-year-old woman with the fire of God in her eyes, he knew she wasn't an actress. I think, Thorne stammered, edging toward the door. I think I need to go. This is too much. You are not going anywhere, Jessica shrieked. If Kelvin was operating out of panic, Jessica was operating out of pure distilled malice. She realized that the grieving son act wasn't working. She realized that the victim card had expired. So she played the only card she had left. She went on the attack. She stepped out from behind the sofa. Her face was pale, but her eyes were burning. She looked at Mama Lucinda with a sneer of absolute disgust. Kelvin is right, she spat. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a razor. Look at her. Look closely. Lucinda was a vegetable. She couldn't walk. She couldn't talk. She was a drooling mess in a wheelchair the last time we saw her. That was a lie. The last time they saw her 2 years ago, she was gardening. But Jessica didn't care about facts. She cared about the narrative. This woman is walking. Jessica continued, gesturing at Mama. She is standing straight up. She is wearing makeup. It is a trick. It is a scam. Booker probably found her in some nursing home in Atlanta and paid her $500 to play the part. She turned to Commander Silas. Officer, I demand you arrest these people for trespassing and harassment. This is our house. We have the deed. We have the keys. We have the death certificate. Remove this old woman from my property immediately. The audacity was breathtaking. She was standing in my mother's living room, surrounded by my mother's furniture, demanding that the police remove my mother from her own home based on a lie that they had concocted 3 days ago. Mama Lucinda didn't move. She didn't shout back. She simply watched them. She watched her son groveling on the floor with a piece of paper. She watched her daughter-in-law spewing venom. Then she spoke. Her voice was not loud. It was the quiet, terrifying voice of a schoolteacher who has lost all patience with the unruly class. Kelvin Jerome Ross, she said. Kelvin flinched. He stopped waving the paper. You say I am an actress, Mama asked. You say I am a stranger. She took a step closer to him. The police officers tensed, but Silas held up a hand to hold them back. He wanted to let this play out. If I am a stranger, Mama said, looking down at him, then how do I know about the scar on your left thigh? Kelvin froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. How do I know? Mama continued, her voice relentless, that you got that scar when you were 7 years old. You were trying to climb the fence to steal Mr. Henderson's apples. You fell and cut yourself on the rusty wire. You were so scared I would whip you that you hid in the shed for 3 hours. She took another step. I found you bleeding. I didn't whip you. I cleaned it with alcohol while you cried. I stitched your pants so your father wouldn't know. I held you on my lap until you fell asleep." She leaned down, her face inches from his. "Does a stranger know that, Kelvin? Does an actress know how you cried that night? Does a certificate from the state of Illinois remember the way I rocked you to sleep?" Kelvin was trembling violently now. The paper in his hand was shaking so hard it was making a rattling sound. He was cornered. The truth was closing in on him, squeezing the air out of his lungs, but he couldn't let go. If he admitted she was real, he admitted he was a monster. So he chose the madness. "Stop it!" he screamed, covering his ears with his hands. "Shut up. You read that in a diary. Booker told you you are not her. My mother is dead. She is ash. I have the urn." He pointed at the brass urn on the table. "That is her, in the jar. That is the real Lucinda. You are just a ghost." Jessica grabbed his shoulder. She was desperate. She saw the police officers exchanging looks. She saw the doubt on the lawyer's face. She knew they were losing control of the room. "Don't listen to her, Kelvin," she yelled. "It is a mind game. They are gaslighting us." She turned to the commander, her face twisted into a snarl. "Are you going to do your job or not?" she screamed at Silas. "I want them out. I want them arrested. This is home invasion. I know my rights. I am a taxpayer. Get this senile old hag out of my house." That was the breaking point. You could feel the shift in the room. The air pressure dropped. Commander Silas Johnson took a step forward. He was a big man, and when he moved, the floorboards groaned. He didn't look at Jessica. He looked at Kelvin. He reached down and plucked the death certificate out of Kelvin's hand. He didn't snatch it. He just took it like a parent taking a dangerous toy away from a toddler. Kelvin grabbed at the empty air. "Hey, give that back. That is my proof." Silas looked at the paper. He read it slowly. Then he looked at Mama Lucinda. Ms. Lucinda, Silas said, his voice deep and rumbling. "Can you tell me your date of birth?" "April 4th, 1929, Mama said clearly. "And your social security number?" Mama recited the numbers without hesitation. Silas nodded. He looked at Kelvin. "Son," Silas said, and the word sounded like a judgment. "I have known your mother for 40 years. I have sat on this porch and eaten her peach cobbler. I know her voice. I know her walk. And I know the look in her eye when she is dealing with a fool." He crumpled the death certificate in his massive fist. It made a dry, crunching sound. "This paper," Silas said, dropping the ball of paper onto the floor, "is a lie. But those handcuffs on my belt? Those are very real." "No," Kelvin shrieked. He tried to scramble away, crawling backward toward the fireplace. "It is a conspiracy. You are all in on it. You are trying to frame me." Jessica realized the ship was sinking. She let go of Kelvin. She backed away from him, holding her hands up. "I didn't know," she shouted, her voice shrill and panicked. "I swear, officer, he told me she was dead. He showed me the body. I am a victim here. He tricked me too." Kelvin stopped crawling. He looked up at his wife, the woman who had told him to sign the papers, the woman who had toasted to the jackpot, the woman who had just called his mother a hag. "You," Kelvin whispered. "You liar. You planned the whole thing. You found the homeless woman. You told me which funeral home to go to." "I did not," Jessica screamed back. "You are a sick, twisted man, Kelvin. Keep me out of this." They were turning on each other. The bond of greed that held them together had snapped, and now they were just two rats in a bucket clawing at each other's eyes to survive. I watched them with a heavy heart. This was my family. This was the bloodline of Big Walter Ross, and it had come to this. A screaming match in the living room while the police prepared to haul them away. Booker, Mama said softly. I turned to her. She looked tired. The fire was still there, but it was burning low. "I have heard enough," she said. I nodded. "Commander," I said, "please remove them." Silas signaled his men. It happened fast. 2 officers grabbed Kelvin. He fought them. He kicked and screamed, thrashing like a child having a tantrum. "She is dead," he howled as they dragged him toward the door. "Tell them she is dead. I have the certificate. I have the proof." His denial lasted until the very end. Even as the cuffs clicked around his wrists, even as they hauled him out into the cold Chicago afternoon, he was still screaming that he was right and the world was wrong. Jessica didn't scream. When Reynolds put the cuffs on her, she went cold. She looked at me with eyes that were black holes of hate. "You think you won?" she hissed as they walked her past me. You are just a sad old man with nothing but a house. We were going to live. We were going to Paris. You are going to prison, Jessica, I said calmly. I hear the view is terrible. And then they were gone. The room was quiet. The only sound was the heavy breathing of the lawyer and the developer in the corner. Thorne, the developer, looked at me. He looked at Mama. He looked at the crumpled ball of paper on the floor. I am going to go now, he whispered. Leave the briefcase, I said. He dropped it instantly and ran. I looked at Mama. She was standing in the middle of the room staring at the spot where Kelvin had been crawling. He never admitted it, she whispered. He never said he was sorry. He couldn't, Mama, I said. If he admitted it, he would have to look at himself in the mirror, and he broke that mirror a long time ago. She nodded slowly. She walked over to the window and watched the squad cars flashing red and blue in the street. He chose the lie, she said. He held on to that paper like it was his Bible. I walked over and put my arm around her shoulders. She felt small but solid. The lie is over, Mama. The truth is the only thing left standing in this house. She turned away from the window. She looked at the room, at the spilled champagne, at the broken glass. Then let's clean it up, she said. I don't want to see any trace of them when I drink my tea. I watched her walk toward the kitchen. She walked with a limp, and her shoulders were slumped, but she was moving forward. Kelvin had tried to bury her. Jessica had tried to erase her, but Lucinda Ross was still here. And as I looked at the crumpled death certificate on the floor, I knew that was the only victory that mattered. The room was vibrating with the kind of tension that usually precedes an explosion. Kelvin was still on his knees, his face twisted into a mask of frantic denial, pointing a shaking finger at the woman who gave birth to him and calling her a fraud. Jessica was pressed against the wall, her chest heaving, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped rat looking for a sewer grate. The lawyer and the developer were frozen in their corner, clutching their briefcases as if they were life preservers in a sinking ship. I looked at Commander Silas Johnson. He was standing by the door, his massive frame blocking out the afternoon light. He wasn't looking at Kelvin. He was looking at me. He was waiting for the signal. He was waiting for the structural engineer to give the final approval to bring the building down. I didn't smile. There was no joy in this. This wasn't a victory lap. It was an amputation. I looked at my brother, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the man who had just tried to sell our history for a pile of cash, and I felt a profound sense of loss. But loss is not a reason to stop. Loss is a reason to finish. I closed my eyes for a brief second, took a breath that tasted of stale champagne and betrayal, and then I looked at Silas and gave a single sharp nod. It was done. Silas stepped into the room. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He moved with the heavy, inevitable momentum of a glacier. Behind him, 4 uniformed officers flowed into the space. They were efficient and silent, a blue wall of authority that cut off every exit and sucked the oxygen out of the room. Kelvin saw them coming. He scrambled backward, his heels scuffing against the hardwood floor. "Stay back," he screamed. "You can't touch me. I know my rights. This is a civil matter. This is my house." Silas stopped 3 feet from him. He looked down at Kelvin with an expression that was part pity and part disgust. It was the look a father gives a son who has committed a sin so great it cannot be forgiven. "Get up," Kelvin, Silas said. His voice was a deep rumble that seemed to come from the basement of the house itself. "I am not getting up," Kelvin yelled. He grabbed the leg of the coffee table. "You have no proof. That woman is a fake. I want a DNA test. I want a court order." Silas reached down. His hand, the size of a catcher's mitt, clamped onto Kelvin's upper arm. He didn't pull him up. He hoisted him. Kelvin rose into the air as if gravity had momentarily ceased to apply to him. Silas slammed him against the wall, not hard enough to break bones, but hard enough to rattle the teeth in his head and knock the wind out of his lungs. "Proof," Silas asked, his face inches from Kelvin's. "You want proof?" He reached into his tactical vest and pulled out a small electronic device. It was a mobile fingerprint scanner, the kind they use at crime scenes. "We ran her prints at the station an hour ago," Kelvin, Silas said. "We ran them against the database. We ran them against her driver's license. We ran them against the employment records from the factory where she worked for 30 years to put food on your table." Kelvin stopped struggling. His eyes went wide. And guess what Silas whispered, the sound terrifyingly intimate. It was a 100% match. "That woman standing there in the red dress is Lucinda May Ross. She is your mother, and you are under arrest." Kelvin slumped. The fight went out of him all at once. His body went limp against the wall, held up only by Silas's grip. But But the certificate, Kelvin whispered. The hospital. Silas leaned back, keeping his hand pinned to Kelvin's chest. He looked over at the table at the brass urn that was still sitting there, shiny and accusing. We know about the certificate, Silas said, and we know about the urn. He motioned to one of the other officers. Bag it. The officer stepped forward, put on a pair of latex gloves, and picked up the urn. He placed it into a large plastic evidence bag. The sound of the zipper sealing shut was loud and final. We are taking that with us, Silas said, his eyes never leaving Kelvin's face. We are going to send the ashes to the state lab. We are going to test for bone fragments. We are going to extract DNA if we can. But we already know what we are going to find, don't we? Kelvin? Kelvin didn't answer. He was staring at the floor. We checked the morgue records, Silas continued. We know about the Jane Doe who died on Tuesday night. We know about the rush cremation order you signed. We know you claimed a homeless woman's body, a woman who had nobody to speak for her, and you burned her so you could cash a check. Silas's voice rose, cracking with suppressed rage. That is abuse of a corpse, Kelvin. That is identity theft. That is forgery. That is grand larceny. And that is the most despicable thing I have ever seen in 30 years on the force. Kelvin Jerome Ross. Silas boomed, and this time he was speaking for the record. You have the right to remain silent. And I suggest, for the sake of whatever soul you have left, you start using that right immediately. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. He spun Kelvin around and kicked his legs apart. The handcuffs came out. Click, click. The sound of steel locking onto wrists echoed through the room. Across the room, Jessica made her move. She had been watching Kelvin get cuffed with a look of pure horror. But the moment the attention shifted, her survival instinct kicked in. She tried to sidle toward the kitchen door, moving slowly, trying to make herself invisible. She looked like a ghost in her white suit, pale and trembling. I stepped into her path. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, a solid block of judgment in a black suit. She stopped. She looked up at me. Her eyes were wet, her mascara running down her cheeks in black rivulets. Booker, she whispered. Her voice was trembling. Booker, please. You know me. You know I wouldn't do this. He lied to me, too. I looked at her. I looked at the diamond earrings she was wearing. I looked at the expensive watch on her wrist. I remembered the video of her toasting to the jackpot. I remembered her calling my mother's quilt a dog bed. Don't, Jessica, I said. Just don't. Officer, she screamed, pivoting toward Silas. I want to make a statement. I am a victim here. My husband is a sociopath. He tricked me. I didn't know the mother was alive. I thought we were legally selling the house. Silas turned to look at her. He handed Kelvin off to two officers and walked over to Jessica. He loomed over her, his shadow swallowing her whole. You didn't know, Silas asked. No, she sobbed. I swear I am a good person. I have a job. I am a project manager. Silas reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it and held it up. It was a printout of a text message thread. This is from your phone, Jessica, Silas said. We pulled the records this morning. He read the text aloud. The old witch is finally gone. Make sure the body is burned before Booker asks for an autopsy. We need that money for Paris. Jessica stopped crying. Her mouth hung open. The color drained from her face until she looked like a wax statue. And this one, Silas continued reading the next line. If the brother asks, tell him she hated him. Make him feel guilty so he stays in Atlanta. I want that house cleared by Friday. Silas lowered the paper. You are not a victim, Mrs. Ross. You are the architect. You are the one who pushed him. You are the one who planned the sale. You are the co-conspirator in a Class X felony. Cuff her, Silas ordered. Jessica started to scream. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was a scream of entitlement. You can't do this to me. I have a reputation. I know people. I am not going to jail. Do you know who I am? Reynolds, who had been standing by the back door, stepped forward. He pulled her hands behind her back with a little more force than was strictly necessary. We know exactly who you are, Lady Reynolds said as he snapped the cuffs on. You are inmate number 2. As they dragged her out, she passed Mama Lucinda. Mama was still standing in the center of the room watching the proceedings with a calm detachment. Jessica lunged at her, straining against the cuffs, her face twisted into a snarl of pure hatred. I hope you die, Jessica screamed. I hope you really die this time, you old hag. You ruined my life. Mama didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She just looked at Jessica with a steady, pitying gaze. I didn't ruin your life, child, Mama said softly. I just turned on the lights. What you did in the dark is your own doing. Get her out of here, Silas growled. The officers hauled Jessica out the door. Her screams faded as they shoved her into the back of a squad car, replaced by the crackle of police radios and the murmurs of the neighbors who had gathered on the lawn. The room was suddenly empty save for me, Mama, Silas, and the two men in the corner. Marcus Thorne, the developer, was shaking. He had watched the entire arrest with his back pressed against the wall, clutching his briefcase so hard his knuckles were white. The lawyer next to him looked like he was about to vomit. Silas turned his attention to them. Gentlemen, Silas said. Thorne jumped. Officer, look, we are innocent parties. We had no idea. We were presented with legal documents. Silas walked over to the table and picked up the check, the one Mama had torn in half. He picked up the pieces. You were buying a $600,000 house for $550,000, Silas said. You were rushing a closing 3 days after a death. You didn't ask questions because the price was right. Thorne swallowed hard. That is just business. It is negligence, Silas said. And if I find out you knew anything about that fake death certificate, if I find one email, one text message linking you to Kelvin before today, I will come back for you. We didn't, the lawyer squeaked. I swear. Then get out, Silas said. And take your paperwork with you. This house is not for sale. Thorne and the lawyer scrambled for the door. They practically tripped over each other in their haste to get away from the house, away from the police, and most of all, away from the judgment of the Ross family. When the door closed behind them, the silence returned. But it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of before. It was a clean silence. The silence of a storm that has finally broken. Silas stood in the middle of the room. He looked tired. He took off his hat and wiped his forehead. I am sorry you had to see that, Ms. Lucinda, he said. Mama walked over to him. She reached up and patted his arm. You did good, Silas, she said. You did what needed to be done. Silas looked at the floor where the shattered champagne glass still lay. I can't believe it, he whispered. I watched him grow up. I remember when he wanted to be an astronaut. How does a boy go from wanting to touch the stars to burning a stranger in a kiln? Greed is a powerful drug. Silas, I said, walking over to join them. It rewrites your memory. It blinds you to everything but the next dollar. Silas nodded. He looked at me. They are going away for a long time, Booker. The abuse of a corpse charge alone carries a heavy sentence. With the fraud, the theft, they won't see the outside of a cell for 20 years. I know, I said. Silas put his hat back on. I have to go down to the station and process the paperwork. I need to secure the evidence. He paused at the door. Ms. Lucinda, do you need a ride somewhere? A hotel. Mama looked around the room. She looked at the photos on the mantel. She looked at the spot on the rug where she had stood her ground. No, Silas, she said. I am home. Booker and I have some cleaning to do. Silas smiled. A genuine, warm smile. All right, then. I will leave an officer outside tonight just in case. Call me if you need anything. He walked out, closing the door softly behind him. I looked at Mama. She was staring at the empty space where Kelvin had been kneeling. Are you okay? I asked. She didn't answer immediately. She walked over to the window and looked out at the street. She watched the squad cars pull away, their lights flashing against the gray Chicago sky. She watched her son being driven away in a cage. I am okay, Booker, she said finally. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't waver. I lost a son today. But I think I lost him a long time ago. Today was just the funeral. She turned back to me. Her eyes were dry. Now she said, pointing to the kitchen. Where is my tea, and bring a broom? We have to sweep up this glass. I won't have my house looking like a crime scene. I watched her walk toward the kitchen, her back straight, her head high. She was bruised, she was battered, but she was unbroken. I followed her, ready to sweep, ready to clean, ready to rebuild. The demolition was over. It was time for the reconstruction. You think the sound of a judge banging a gavel is the loudest sound in the legal system, but you are wrong. The loudest sound is the click of handcuffs closing around the wrists of your own brother in the hallway of the house where you both learned to walk. It is a mechanical finality that echoes off the walls and vibrates in your teeth. Kelvin was slumped against the doorframe, held up only by the grip of two officers. His expensive suit was rumpled, his tie was askew, and his face was a portrait of absolute ruin. He wasn't crying anymore. He was hyperventilating. He was looking at the floor, at the ceiling, at anything but me or Mama Lucinda. But if Kelvin was broken, Jessica was detonating. She was standing near the patrol car, struggling against Reynolds, who was holding her arm with a firm professional grip. She wasn't looking at the ground. She was looking at Kelvin, and her eyes were not filled with compassion. They were filled with the terrified fury of a rat realizing the ship wasn't just sinking, it was already underwater. "He made me do it," she screamed. Her voice was raw, scraping against the afternoon air. "I didn't know anything. He told me his mother was dead. He showed me the certificate. I am a victim here." She twisted her body, trying to make eye contact with Commander Silas Johnson. "Officer, please listen to me. I am a respectable woman. I work in project management. I have never broken a law in my life. My husband is a liar and a manipulator. He threatened me. He said if I didn't help him sell the house, he would hurt me." I watched Kelvin's head snap up. The shock on his face was genuine. He had just lost his freedom, his mother, and his inheritance. But hearing his wife throw him to the wolves seemed to be the blow that actually drew blood. "Jessica," he whispered hoarsely. "What are you saying?" "We planned this together. You found the buyer. You found the notary." "Liar," she shrieked, spitting the word at him. "You are a sick, pathological liar. I only went along with it because I was afraid of you. You dragged me into this. I want a lawyer. I want to file a restraining order." It was a masterclass in survival instinct. She was willing to send him to prison for 50 years if it meant she could plead down to a misdemeanor. She was rewriting history in real time, painting herself as the battered wife and him as the criminal mastermind. And for a second, I saw a flicker of doubt in the younger officer's eyes. Jessica knew how to play the part. She was crying now, big, heaving sobs that shook her shoulders. She looked small and defenseless in her white designer suit. I couldn't let it happen. I couldn't let her use her tears to wash away her sins. I stepped off the porch and walked down the steps. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "Reynolds," I said, my voice cutting through her sobbing. "Hold her right there." I tapped the screen and opened the audio file that Reynolds had sent me 2 days ago. It was a recording taken from the listening device in the living room the night before the sale. The quality was crystal clear. I held the phone up in the air like a lantern in the darkness. Jessica's voice rang out, filling the space between the house and the street. "Stop whining, Kelvin. The old hag is gone. Who cares if we burn a stranger? Just sign the papers. Once we get the money, we dump the rest of her junk at the Goodwill and fly to Paris. I never want to set foot in this dusty old dump again." The recording continued. "Make sure you cry at the funeral, Kelvin. People love a sad son. And if your brother calls, tell him she hated him. Break his heart so he stays away." I pressed stop. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Jessica's mouth was open, but no sound came out. The tears stopped instantly, proving they were nothing but saltwater props. I looked at her. "He threatened you?" I asked. "Because it sounds to me like you were the one giving the orders, Jessica. It sounds to me like you were the one calling my mother a hag. It sounds to me like you were the one planning the disposal of her belongings like they were trash." She stared at the phone in my hand as if it were a gun. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking gray and old. She knew. She knew the game was over. The mask had been ripped off, and underneath there was nothing but greed and rot. Kelvin was staring at her too. He looked like a man waking up from a long coma, only to find out his legs had been cut off. "You called the funeral a show," he whispered. "You told me you loved me. You told me we were partners." "I loved the money, you idiot," she hissed, dropping the act completely. Her face twisted into a snarl that was ugly and real. "I loved the idea of $600,000. I didn't love you. Look at you. You are a loser, Kelvin. You have always been a loser. You can't even steal a house right." Commander Silas shook his head in disgust. "Get her out of my sight," he growled. As the officers shoved her into the back of the squad car, she started screaming again, but this time it was just obscenities. She cursed me. She cursed Mama. She cursed the police. She cursed the world for having the audacity to catch her. But the nightmare wasn't over. Just as the door to the squad car slammed shut, a black SUV with tinted windows rolled slowly down the street. It didn't have police plates. It moved with a predatory slowness, creeping along the curb like a shark in shallow water. It stopped right in front of the house, blocking the driveway. 2 men got out. They were huge men wearing leather jackets that were too tight across the shoulders. They didn't look like neighbors. They didn't look like buyers. They looked like consequences. Kelvin saw them and he started to shake. It wasn't the trembling of nervousness anymore. It was the convulsive shaking of terror. "No," he whimpered. "Not now. Please, God, not now." The driver of the SUV, a man with a shaved head and a neck tattoo, took a few steps onto the lawn. He ignored the police. He ignored the neighbors. He looked straight at Kelvin. He didn't say a word. He just tapped his wrist where a watch would be. I knew who they were. You don't work in construction in big cities for 40 years without learning to recognize the loan sharks. These were the men Kelvin owed. These were the men who had motivated him to fake his mother's death. These were the men who were expecting a payout today. Commander Silas stepped forward, his hand resting on his holster. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he asked, his voice dangerously polite. "This is a crime scene." The man with the tattoo didn't flinch. He looked at Silas, then he looked at the handcuffs on Kelvin's wrists. He looked at the for sale sign that had been knocked over in the grass. He smiled. It was a cold, dead smile. "Just checking on an investment," he said. "Looks like the market crashed." He looked back at Kelvin. "We heard you were coming into some property, Kelvin," the man said. "We heard today was payday." Kelvin shrank back against the police car, trying to hide behind the officer arresting him. For the first time in his life, he was glad to be in police custody. The handcuffs were the only thing protecting him from a much more brutal form of justice. I don't have it," Kelvin stammered. The deal fell through. I am going to jail." The man laughed. It was a dry sound like sandpaper on concrete. "Jail," he repeated. "You think jail cancels the debt Kelvin interest accumulates, even inside. You have friends inside, right? Because we have friends inside, and they are going to be very disappointed to hear that you wasted our time." Silas took another step forward. "That sounds like a threat," he said. "Just financial advice, officer," the man said, holding up his hands. He looked at Kelvin one last time. He made a small gesture with his hand, a slicing motion across his throat that was so subtle you would miss it if you weren't looking. But Kelvin saw it. I saw it. "We will be seeing you, Kelvin," the man said. They got back into the SUV. The engine roared to life, and they drove away, slowly disappearing around the corner. Kelvin collapsed against the side of the police car. He slid down until he was sitting on the pavement, weeping into his knees. He wasn't just ruined legally, he was ruined completely. I walked over to him. I stood over my brother, looking down at the wreck of his life. "Who were they, Kelvin?" I asked. "The guys I owe," he sobbed. "I owe them 80,000 Booker. I borrowed it to play the tables. I lost it all. They told me if I didn't pay them by Friday, they would break my legs. That is why I did it. I needed the house money to pay them off." I shook my head. "So you sold your mother to save your knees," I said. "I had no choice." He wailed. "You always have a choice," I said. "You could have asked for help. You could have told the truth. You could have faced your mistakes like a man. Instead, you dug a grave for your mother and tried to push her into it." I looked at the house standing strong and proud behind us. "And now look at you," I said. "You are going to prison for 20 years. And when you get there, those men will be waiting. You lost the house. You lost your wife. You lost your freedom. And you still owe the money." Kelvin looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen. "Help me, Booker," he begged. "Pay them. Please. You have money. If you don't pay them, they will kill me inside." I looked at him. I thought about the quilt Jessica had sold for $15. I thought about the urn on the table. I thought about Mama standing in the living room having to prove she was alive. "No," I said. "Booker, please, I am your brother." "My brother wouldn't burn a stranger," I said. "My brother wouldn't let his wife call our mother a hag. You are just a man who made a bet and lost." I turned my back on him. "Commander," I said, "take him away." "No," Kelvin screamed as they hauled him into the car. "Booker, Mama, don't let them take me." The door slammed shut. The sound was final. I watched the car drive away. I watched the red taillights fade into the distance. I felt a hand on my arm. I turned to see Mama Lucinda standing there. She had come out onto the porch. She had seen the loan sharks. She had seen the arrest. "Is he gone?" she asked. "He is gone, Mama," I said. "And the men in the black car, they are gone too, but they will find him." Mama nodded. She looked sad, but she didn't look surprised. He dug the hole, Booker, she said. Now he has to lie in it, even if the ground is hard. We stood there for a moment, watching the street return to normal. The neighbors were dispersing, whispering among themselves. The show was over. What a waste, she whispered. What a terrible waste of a life. It is, Mama, I said. But it is not our waste. We have a house to save. She squeezed my arm. Yes, we do. Come inside, son. The kettle is whistling. I followed her back into the house. The air outside was cold, but inside it was beginning to feel warm again. The parasites were gone. The debt was Kelvin's alone, and we were free. The adrenaline of a police raid fades quickly, leaving behind a strange, sterile silence that feels heavy in the lungs. The house was now technically a crime scene. Uniformed officers were moving room to room with latex gloves, cataloging the physical evidence of my brother's betrayal. They were photographing the shattered champagne glass on the floor. They were bagging the fake contract. They were dusting the brass urn for fingerprints, even though we all knew exactly whose prints they would find. I needed to step away from the noise. I needed a moment to calibrate my own internal structure, which felt like it had been subjected to a stress test far beyond its design limits. I left Mama Lucinda in the kitchen, where she was calmly drinking tea with Commander Silas, and walked down the hallway to her bedroom. This room was the heart of the house. It smelled of lavender and old paper, the scent of my childhood. Kelvin had not touched this room yet. He had been too busy staging the living room for the sale, too busy drinking champagne to bother with the sanctuary where his mother slept. I walked over to the dresser. It was an old mahogany piece, heavy and solid, covered with a lace doily. On top sat the framed photos of our family. There was me at my graduation from engineering school. There was Kelvin at his prom, looking young and innocent in a powder blue tuxedo. And there was a photo of my wife, Letitia. I picked up the picture. Letitia, my Letty. She had been gone for 10 years, but the pain of her loss was still a dull ache in my joints, especially on rainy days. She had died of pancreatic cancer, a slow and agonizing decline that had stripped the light from my world. I opened the top drawer of the dresser. Mama was a keeper of things. She kept birthday cards. She kept report cards. She kept every letter anyone had ever written to her. In the back of the drawer, tied with a faded blue ribbon, was a stack of envelopes. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was elegant looping script, the kind they don't teach in schools anymore. It was Letitia's handwriting. My heart hammered against my ribs. I untied the ribbon, my fingers feeling thick and clumsy. The letters were dated from 10 years ago, the last year of her life. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the mattress groaning under my weight. The police radios crackled in the distance, but the sound seemed to come from another planet. I was alone in the past. I opened the first letter. It was dated January 10th. Dearest Mama Lucinda, I hope this letter finds you well. The treatments are hard. The doctor says the new experimental drug is our best hope, but the insurance won't cover it. Booker is trying to be strong, but I hear him crying in the garage at night. He is working double shifts. He is trying to sell the boat. I worry about his heart. I wiped a tear from my eye. I remembered that winter. I remembered the desperate scramble for cash, the sleepless nights, staring at the ceiling, wondering how much a human life was worth in dollars. I opened the next letter, dated February 4th. Mama. Good news. Kelvin called. He said he has a friend who works at the bank. He said he can help us transfer the retirement funds faster to pay for the first round of the clinical trial. I know you worry about Kelvin, but he sounded so sincere. He said he wants to help. He said he loves Booker and wants to save me. I gave him the account details. We are waiting for the transfer. I froze. I read that paragraph again, and then a third time. I remembered that transfer. I remembered the money vanishing from my account. I remembered Kelvin telling me there was a glitch, a banking error, a freeze on the assets because of some Patriot Act regulation. He had delayed us for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. In the world of aggressive cancer, 3 weeks is a lifetime. During those 3 weeks, Letitia's condition had deteriorated rapidly. By the time the money was finally sorted out, or so I thought, the doctors said she was too weak for the first round of the trial. We missed the window. I opened the third letter. It was dated February 28th. The handwriting was shaky now. Weak. Mama. The money is still missing. Kelvin isn't answering his phone. Booker is going out of his mind. He is trying to take out a second mortgage, but the bank is asking questions about the missing funds. I don't want to tell Booker what I suspect. He loves his brother so much. If he knew that Kelvin might have taken it, it would break him. Please pray for us, Mama. I am scared. The paper shook in my hands. I remembered Kelvin coming to the hospital a month later. He had looked sad. He had brought flowers. He told me the bank had finally cleared the error, but it was too late. He had hugged me while I wept over my wife's cooling body. He had lied. He hadn't just lied about a house. He hadn't just lied about Mama dying. He had stolen the money that could have saved my wife, or if not saved her, gave her a fighting chance. He had taken $50,000 of my hard-earned money meant for chemotherapy, and he had gambled it away or spent it on cars or suits while my wife lay in a hospital bed waiting for a medicine that never came. A coldness spread through my chest that was absolute. It wasn't the hot rage of the last few days. It was something deeper. It was the feeling of the earth opening up and swallowing the last shred of humanity I had attributed to my brother. I had felt a twinge of pity for him earlier. When I saw him weeping on the floor, when I saw him realizing his life was over, I had felt the ghost of brotherly love. I had thought, he is a thief, but he is my blood. But reading these letters, the blood turned to ice. He was not a thief. He was a killer. He had looked me in the eye at Letitia's funeral and told me he was sorry for my loss, and all the while he had her life savings in his pocket. I stood up. The bed creaked. I didn't put the letters back in the drawer. I held them in my hand. They felt heavy, like lead weights. I walked out of the bedroom. My steps were heavy and deliberate. I walked down the hallway past the officers bagging evidence, past the spot where the champagne had spilled, past the ghosts of the family I thought I had. I walked into the kitchen. Mama looked up from her tea. She saw my face. She saw the letters in my hand. Her expression changed from calm to concern. "Booker," she asked softly. "What is it?" I placed the letters on the table in front of Commander Silas. "Read them," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. It sounded like grinding stones. Silas looked at me, then he picked up the letters. He put on his reading glasses. The kitchen was silent. The only sound was the rustling of paper as Silas read the words of a dead woman. I watched his face. I saw the moment he understood. I saw his eyes widen. I saw his jaw clench. He finished the last letter and set it down gently as if it were fragile. He took off his glasses and looked at me. 10 years ago, he said quietly. "The cancer treatment." "Yes," I said. "He told me it was a banking error. He told me the funds were frozen. But he took it. He took it all, Silas. And he let her wait. He let her wait until she was too sick to fight." Silas closed his eyes and let out a long, slow breath. That is evil, Booker. There is no other word for it." Mama reached out and took the letters. She held them to her chest. I suspected she whispered. Letitia called me. She was crying. But we never had proof. Kelvin swore on his life he didn't touch it. I wanted to believe him. God help me, I wanted to believe my son wasn't a monster. "He is a monster, Mama," I said. "And he has been feeding on us for decades." I turned to Silas. "You asked me earlier if I wanted to pursue the maximum charges," I said. Silas nodded. "I want to amend the complaint," I said. "I want you to give these letters to the district attorney. I want them to subpoena his bank records from 10 years ago. I want them to trace every cent of that transfer. It might be past the statute of limitations for the theft itself," Silas said gently. "It has been 10 years, Booker. I don't care about the theft," I said. "I care about the character witness. When he stands in front of that judge and asks for leniency, when his lawyer talks about how he is a first-time offender who made a mistake, I want the judge to read these letters. I want the judge to know that this man didn't just try to sell a house. He sold his sister-in-law's life for chips at a casino." Silas nodded, his face grim. "We can do that. It goes to motive. It goes to a pattern of predatory behavior. It will kill any chance of a plea deal. It will bury him, Booker. He will never see the light of day." "Good," I said. I walked over to the window and looked out at the backyard. The oak tree my father planted was shedding its leaves. It looked bare and cold against the gray sky. I had spent my whole life protecting Kelvin. I had paid his debts. I had bailed him out. I had kept his secrets because I thought that was what family did. I thought loyalty meant shielding your own from the consequences of their actions. But I was wrong. Loyalty isn't a suicide pact, and love isn't a license to destroy. I looked back at Mama. She was crying now, silent tears running down her cheeks as she held Letitia's letters. "I am sorry, Mama," I said. "I know he is your son, but I am done. I am cutting the cord." She looked up at me. She wiped her eyes with her handkerchief. "He stopped being my son the day he let Letitia die," she said. "Do what you have to do, Booker. Finish it." I looked at Silas. "No mercy, Silas. Not a single drop." Silas stood up and put the letters into an evidence bag. "Consider it done," he said. He walked out of the kitchen to make the call. I sat down opposite Mama. I reached across the table and took her hands. They were cold. "We are going to be okay, Mama," I said. She nodded, squeezing my hands. "We are Booker. But tell me something. What is it, Mama? Why didn't she tell you? Why did Letitia keep it a secret?" I looked at the empty doorway where the evidence bag had just disappeared. "Because she loved me, Mama. She knew if I knew the truth back then, I would have killed him. She wanted to save me from becoming a murderer." I took a deep breath. She saved me then. And today, I am saving myself. The house was quiet. The ghosts were still there, but they weren't whispering anymore. They were screaming for justice. And for the first time in 10 years, I felt like I could finally give it to them. The Cook County Courthouse is a building designed to make you feel small. The ceilings are too high, the marble floors echo with the footsteps of the condemned, and the air always smells of floor wax and desperate prayers. I had been in courtrooms before as an expert witness for structural failures, testifying about why a bridge collapsed or why a foundation cracked. But sitting in the gallery of courtroom 302, watching my own brother being led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, I realized that the collapse of a human soul is far more catastrophic than falling concrete. It had been 3 months since the arrest. 3 months of legal maneuvering, 3 months of motions to dismiss, 3 months of Jessica trying to sever her case from Kelvin's. Her lawyers had argued that she was a victim of spousal coercion, that she was a battered wife forced into a criminal conspiracy. But the judge, a stern woman named Justice Halloway who had no patience for theatrics, had denied every motion. She looked at the text messages. She looked at the video of the champagne toast. She ruled that they would be tried together. They were partners in crime, and they would be partners in judgment. I sat in the front row. Next to me, Mama Lucinda sat in her wheelchair. She didn't need it anymore. Her strength had returned with the spring weather, but she insisted on using it today. She said it was a reminder to the court of exactly who they had tried to bury. She wore a navy blue suit and a hat with a small veil. She looked like a widow, but she wasn't mourning a husband. She was mourning the memory of a son who had chosen to become a ghost. Kelvin and Jessica were brought in separately. Kelvin looked terrible. He had lost 30 pounds. His skin was sallow gray and hung loosely on his frame. The swagger was gone. The entitlement was gone. He walked with a shuffle, keeping his eyes glued to the floor. He didn't look at the gallery. He couldn't. He knew we were there, and the weight of our presence seemed to press down on his shoulders like physical lead. Jessica, on the other hand, looked like a caged tiger. She had lost her expensive highlights. Her roots were showing dark and stark against the bleached blonde. She wasn't wearing designer clothes today. She was wearing a court-issued blouse that was 2 sizes too big, but her eyes were still sharp. She scanned the room, glaring at the jury, glaring at the prosecutor, and finally glaring at Kelvin. The trial itself had been a spectacle of mutual destruction. For the past week, we had watched as their defense teams tore each other apart. It was the prisoner's dilemma played out in real time. Kelvin's lawyer, a public defender who looked overworked and tired, painted Kelvin as a weak-willed man manipulated by a sociopathic wife. He argued that Kelvin was grieving, confused, and under extreme financial pressure, and that Jessica had preyed on his vulnerability to orchestrate the sale. Jessica's lawyer, a high-priced shark she had hired by liquidating her 401k, painted the opposite picture. He portrayed Jessica as an innocent professional woman who had been duped by a lying husband. He claimed Kelvin had forged the death certificate alone, that Kelvin had hired the funeral home alone, and that Jessica had simply believed what her husband told her. But today was the end. Today was the closing arguments and the verdict. But before that, there was one final witness. The prosecutor, a young man with a sharp suit and a sharper mind, stood up. "The people call Lucinda May Ross to the stand," A murmur went through the courtroom. The jury sat up straighter. They had heard about her. They had seen the death certificate. They had seen the photos of the urn. Now they were going to see the miracle. I wheeled Mama to the witness box. The bailiff helped her into the chair. She adjusted her microphone. She looked out at the sea of faces, and then her eyes landed on the defense table. Kelvin finally looked up. When his eyes met hers, he flinched as if he had been slapped. He mouthed the word "Mama," but no sound came out. Jessica just stared at her, her jaw set in a hard line of defiance. Mrs. Ross, the prosecutor, began gently. "Can you state your name for the record, Lucinda May Ross?" Mama said. Her voice was clear, amplified by the speakers filling the room with a dignity that silenced the whispers in the back row. "And do you recognize the defendants in this case?" "I recognize the woman," Mama said, looking at Jessica. "That is Jessica Ross. She is my daughter-in-law. Or she was." "And the man," the prosecutor asked. "Do you recognize him?" Mama paused. The silence stretched out taut as a piano wire. I watched Kelvin's hands gripping the edge of the table. He was trembling. He was waiting for her to save him. He was waiting for the mother who had nursed his wounds and paid his debts to emerge and ask for mercy. He thought that because she was his mother, she was biologically incapable of condemning him. He was wrong. Mama looked at him. She looked at the man who had stolen her husband's money. She looked at the man who had stolen Letitia's cancer treatment funds. She looked at the man who had burned a homeless woman in her name. "No," Mama said softly. "I don't recognize him." The courtroom gasped. Kelvin's lawyer jumped up. "Objection! The witness is clearly overruled," the judge snapped. "Continue, Mrs. Ross." Mama didn't look away from Kelvin. "I had a son named Kelvin," she said. "He was a sweet boy. He liked baseball and peach cobbler. He wanted to be an astronaut, but that boy died a long time ago." She took a breath and her voice hardened into steel. "The man sitting there, I don't know him. My son died the day he decided to put a stranger in a jar and sell my home for gambling money. My son died the day he looked me in the eye and told the police I was an imposter. I don't have a son named Kelvin anymore. I am a childless widow, sir." Kelvin let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. He put his head in his hands and wept. It wasn't the fake crying of the funeral. This was the sound of a man realizing that he had severed the last root that held him to the earth. He was unmoored. He was an orphan by his own design. The prosecutor nodded solemnly. No further questions. The jury didn't need long. They were out for less than 2 hours. When they filed back in, they didn't look at the defendants. That is always the tell. If the jury looks at you, they might have mercy. If they look at the floor, you are finished. "We find the defendant Kelvin Ross guilty on all counts," the foreman read. "Guilty of grand larceny, guilty of forgery, guilty of abuse of a corpse, guilty of identity theft. We find the defendant Jessica Ross guilty on all counts." Jessica let out a sharp cry. "No, that's not fair. I didn't do it." The judge banged her gavel. Silence in the court. She looked at the two of them. Her expression was one of profound distaste. "I have sat on this bench for 20 years, Justice Halloway said. "I have seen murderers, rapists, and gang leaders. But I have rarely seen a crime as morally bankrupt as this one." She picked up a file. It was the file containing the letters from Letitia. "Mr. Ross, your brother submitted evidence regarding a previous theft involving his late wife's medical funds. While the statute of limitations prevents me from charging you for that crime, I can and will consider it as evidence of your character during sentencing. You have a history of preying on the women in your family who are sick or dying. You are a predator who hides behind the mask of a son and a brother." She turned to Jessica. "And you, Mrs. Ross, you attempted to paint yourself as a victim, but the evidence shows you were the driving force. You mocked the death of a homeless woman. You viewed your mother-in-law as disposable clutter. Your greed is matched only by your cruelty." The judge took a breath. "For the charge of abuse of a corpse, the desecration of the unidentified woman known as Jane Doe, I sentence you both to the maximum of 5 years. For grand larceny and fraud, I sentence you to 15 years. These sentences are to run consecutively." Consecutively. That was the word that sucked the air out of the room. Not concurrently. Consecutively. 20 years. Kelvin would be 85 years old when he walked out. If he walked out. Jessica screamed. She stood up and tried to lunge at her lawyer. "You said 5 years. You promised me a deal." Bailiffs swarmed her. They grabbed her arms and forced her back down. She was thrashing, cursing, her face twisted into a mask of pure ugliness. Kelvin didn't move. He just sat there staring at the table. 20 years. The loan sharks wouldn't have to break his legs. The state of Illinois had just done it for them. "Take them away," the judge ordered. The bailiffs hauled them up. As they led them toward the side door, the door that leads to the holding cells and the vans and the cages, Kelvin stopped. He turned around. He looked for us. "Mama," he yelled. His voice was cracked and desperate. "Mama, I'm sorry. Please don't let them take me. Mama." Lucinda didn't turn her head. She sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead at the seal of the state of Illinois hanging above the judge's bench. She didn't blink. She didn't cry. She had said her goodbye in the witness box. The door slammed shut. The sound echoed through the courtroom like the lid of a coffin closing. It was over. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 10 years. The tension in my neck released. The structure had held. The stress test was complete. I stood up and walked around to the front of the wheelchair. "Are you ready to go, Mama?" I asked. She looked up at me. Her eyes were dry but tired. "I am ready, Booker," she said. I pushed her up the aisle. The courtroom was clearing out. People were watching us, whispering, pointing. "That's the mother. That's the brother." We were a spectacle, a news story, a warning. We rolled out into the hallway and toward the elevators. The sun was streaming through the windows, bright and indifferent. "Did I do the right thing?" Booker Mama asked suddenly, her voice small. I stopped the chair. I knelt down in front of her so I could look her in the eye. "You didn't put him in that cell, Mama," I said firmly. "He put himself there. You just refused to let him drag you in with him." She nodded slowly. "He looked so small," she whispered. "At the end there. He looked just like he did when he was 7 and fell off that fence." "I know," I said. "But he isn't 7 anymore, and we can't stitch this up." The elevator doors opened. We got in. "Where do you want to go?" I asked. "Home." "No," she said. She adjusted her hat. "Take me to the cemetery." "The cemetery I need to visit your father," she said. "And I need to visit Letitia. I have some things to tell them. And then we need to find out where they buried the ashes of that poor woman." "Kelvin burned," she said. "I want to put flowers on her grave. She died so I could get my life back. The least I can do is pay my respects." I smiled. Even in her grief, she was thinking of dignity. "We can do that, Mama," I said. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened onto the busy lobby full of lawyers and clients and families caught in the gears of the system. We rolled out into the world, leaving the wreckage of the past behind us, locked in a cage for 20 years. The air outside was fresh. It smelled of Lake Michigan and exhaust fumes and freedom. "Let's go," Booker Mama said. "I'm driving." I laughed. "You are in a wheelchair, Mama. I am driving the spirit boy," she said, cracking a smile for the first time in months. "You are just the engine." I pushed her down the ramp toward the parking lot. The trial was over. The verdict was in. And for the first time in a long time, the foundation of the Ross family felt solid again. Selling the house on South King Drive was not a transaction, it was an exorcism. For 40 years, that red brick building had held the laughter of my father and the prayers of my mother, but in the last 3 months it had absorbed too much poison. Kelvin's greed had seeped into the drywall. Jessica's malice had stained the floorboards. Even after we scrubbed the champagne from the rug and threw out the furniture they had sat on, the air inside felt heavy. It felt like a museum of betrayal. Mama Lucinda felt it too. The morning after the trial, she walked through the empty rooms, her cane tapping a hollow rhythm on the hardwood. She stopped in the living room, where she had confronted her son. She looked at the spot where he had crawled on the floor begging for a check instead of forgiveness. "It is just a house now, Booker," she said. "It is not a home anymore. The spirit has left." I knew she was right. As an engineer, I know that a building is only as strong as the people inside it. When the family breaks, the structure loses its purpose. We listed it the next day. The market in Bronzeville was hot, just like Jessica had said. It was the only truth she had told during the entire ordeal. We didn't sell it to a developer who wanted to tear it down. We sold it to a young couple. He was a teacher, and she was a nurse. They had a baby on the way. When they walked in, I saw them look at the high ceilings and the sturdy oak floors, not with dollar signs in their eyes, but with dreams. They saw a nursery. They saw Christmas dinners. They saw a future. We sold it for $650,000. $50,000 more, than Kelvin had tried to steal it for. There was a grim irony in that. If he had just waited, if he had just been a good son, he might have eventually inherited a fortune. But greed is impatient. It wants the harvest without doing the planting. The day we handed over the keys, I didn't look back. I helped Mama into the truck and we pointed the nose south toward Atlanta, toward peace. We didn't keep all the money. That money felt heavy in my pocket. It felt like it was cursed. We needed to wash it clean. Before we left Chicago, we made one stop. We drove to the west side to a shelter called The Haven. It was a rundown building with peeling paint and barred windows, a place where the forgotten women of the city went when the world had chewed them up and spit them out. This was where the woman Kelvin had burned likely spent her final nights, the Jane Doe, the woman whose body had been stolen to facilitate a lie. We walked into the director's office. The director was a tired-looking woman named Sarah, who looked like she hadn't slept in a week. She was surrounded by stacks of paperwork and bills she couldn't pay. "Can I help you?" she asked, looking at Mama's wheelchair and my suit. "We are here to make a donation," Mama said. Sarah sighed. "We appreciate anything you can give, canned goods, clothes, blankets." "No," Mama said. "We are here to give you a wing." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a check. It was for $100,000. Sarah took the check. She looked at the number. She looked at it for a long time, adjusting her glasses as if she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. "Is this real?" she whispered. "It is real," I said. "But there is a condition." Anything Sarah said, tears welling up in her eyes. "You are going to build a new dormitory," Mama said. "A warm, safe place for women who have nowhere else to go. And you are going to name it." "Name it what?" Sarah asked, grabbing a pen. "The Lucinda Wing," Mama said. Sarah smiled. "That is a beautiful name. Is it named after you, ma'am?" Mama shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "It is named after a woman who died alone. It is named after a woman whose name we will never know, but whose death saved my life. You call it the Lucinda Wing, but when you pray for the unknown sister, because no one should leave this world without a name." We left the shelter, leaving Sarah crying happy tears in her office. The money that Kelvin had tried to use for sports cars and trips to Paris was now going to put roofs over the heads of women he would have stepped over in the street. It was the first time since this whole nightmare began that I felt the balance of the universe shifting back toward justice. We arrived in Atlanta 2 days later. I didn't bring Mama back to my townhouse. It was too vertical, too many stairs, and frankly it was too lonely. I used the rest of the money from the Chicago sale combined with my own savings to buy something different. It was a small villa on the outskirts of the city in a quiet neighborhood where the trees were old and the neighbors waved when you drove by. It was a single-story house with wide doorways and no steps. It had a wraparound porch that faced the sunset. But the best part was the backyard. It was a blank canvas, just good, rich Georgia soil waiting for a purpose. I hired a landscaping crew, but Mama fired them on the first day. She said they didn't know how to talk to the dirt. So we did it ourselves. Or rather, she directed and I dug. For the next 2 months, that garden became our therapy. I traded my blueprints for a shovel. I dug holes for hydrangeas. I built raised beds for tomatoes and peppers. I laid a stone path that wound through the azaleas wide enough for a wheelchair, but smooth enough for a walker. Mama sat on the porch supervising. She was ruthless. "Deeper Booker," she would say, pointing with her cane. "That rosebush needs room to breathe. If the roots are shallow, the first storm will tear it out. You of all people should know that." I smiled, wiping sweat from my forehead. "I know, Mama," I said. "Deep roots, strong foundation. We planted white lilies in the corner. Mama said they were for Letitia. She said Letitia always loved white flowers because they looked like moonlight. We planted red roses by the gate. Those are for Big Walter," she said, "because he was a stubborn, prickly man, but he was beautiful when he bloomed." And in the center of the garden, under the shade of a young dogwood tree, we placed a small stone bench. We didn't plant anything there. We just left a quiet space. "Who is that for, Mama?" I asked one evening as we sat on the porch drinking iced tea. She looked at the empty bench. "That is for Kelvin," she said softly. I looked at her, surprised. "You are planting a garden for him." "No," she said. "I am leaving a space for the boy he used to be, the boy who brought me dandelions in his fist. That boy is dead, Booker. But I still miss him. I can hate the man he became, but I can't stop loving the child I raised. That bench is for me to sit and remember the good days before the money and the greed poisoned his blood. I nodded. I understood. Forgiveness wasn't about letting him out of prison. It was about letting him out of our hearts so he couldn't hurt us anymore. Life in Atlanta settled into a rhythm. It was a slow, gentle rhythm, very different from the frantic beat of the construction sites I was used to. We woke up early. I made breakfast. We worked in the garden. We watched the news. We didn't talk about the trial much. We didn't talk about the 20-year sentence. We didn't talk about Jessica screaming in the courtroom. Those were stories from another life, a dark chapter that we had closed and put back on the shelf. One afternoon, a letter arrived. It had the return address of the state penitentiary. I brought it to Mama. She was sitting in the garden, deadheading the petunias. "It is from him," I said, holding the envelope. She looked at it. She saw the handwriting, the familiar scrawl that used to sign birthday cards and forged checks. "Do you want to read it?" I asked. She wiped her hands on her apron. She took the envelope. She held it for a long moment, weighing it. It was light, just a single sheet of paper. "What can he say, Booker?" she asked. "Can he give me back the last 10 years? Can he give Letitia back her life? Can he unburn that poor woman?" "No, Mama," I said. "He can't." "Then I have nothing to hear," she said. She tore the envelope in half. She didn't open it. She didn't look at the words. She just tore it and dropped the pieces into the compost bin next to the dead leaves and the coffee grounds. "Let it turn into fertilizer," she said. "At least then he will finally be doing something good for this earth. He can help the tomatoes grow." We watched the pieces of paper disappear into the mulch. It was a cold act, but it was necessary. You cannot let the rot back into the garden once you have cleared it. I looked at my mother. She was 94 years old. Her hair was white as snow. Her hands were gnarled like old oak roots, but she looked younger than she had in years. The weight was gone. The secret was out. She didn't have to pretend anymore. She didn't have to protect a lie. She looked up at me and smiled. "You know, Booker," she said, "I think we need more color over there by the fence. What do you think about marigolds?" "I think marigolds would be perfect," I said. "Good," she said. "We will go to the nursery tomorrow. Now help me up. My knees are stiff and I think I smell rain coming." I helped her stand. She leaned on my arm, heavy and solid. We walked back toward the house, toward the warm yellow light spilling out of the kitchen windows. The sun was setting, painting the Georgia sky in shades of purple and gold. I am an engineer. I have spent my life building things that stand the test of time. I have built bridges that span rivers and skyscrapers that scrape the clouds. But as I walked my mother into our new home, I realized that the most important thing I ever built wasn't made of steel or concrete. It was this peace, this safety, this quiet garden where an old woman could plant flowers without fear of being uprooted. We had demolished the lies. We had cleared the rubble. And now, on the solid ground of truth, we were finally building a home. I opened the door for her. "After you, Mama," I said. She walked in, and I followed, closing the door firmly against the night. The storm was over. The silence was gone. And the only sound left was the kettle whistling on the stove, singing a song of new beginnings. The sun sets differently here in Atlanta. It doesn't rush below the horizon like it seemed to do in Chicago. It takes its time, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and burnt orange before finally slipping away behind the pine trees. I am sitting on the porch of our new house. The rocking chair beneath me has a steady rhythm, creak back, creak forward. It is a sound I used to associate with old age and uselessness, but now I know it is the sound of victory. It is the sound of time that finally belongs to me. Mama Lucinda is sitting next to me. She has a blanket over her lap even though the evening is warm. She is holding a cup of Earl Grey tea, watching the steam rise and curl into the air. We don't talk much in the evenings. We don't have to. For years, our silence was filled with worry. I would sit in silence wondering if Kelvin was gambling. Mama would sit in silence wondering if he was eating. Our silence was a container for anxiety. But tonight the silence is empty. It is light. It is just two people resting after a long, hard job, well done. I look at her hands, the hands that signed the papers that sent her son to prison. They are steady. There is no tremor of regret. I used to think that love meant holding on tight no matter how much it hurt. I thought that being a brother meant standing in the fire so Kelvin wouldn't get burned. I thought that being a son meant protecting my mother from the truth of her own child. I was wrong. I spent 40 years as a structural engineer calculating stress loads. I knew exactly how much weight a steel beam could hold before it buckled. But I never applied that math to my own heart. I let Kelvin pile on the weight of his debts, his lies, and his betrayals until the structural integrity of this family was compromised. We didn't just survive a scam, we survived a realization. We realized that sometimes the person holding the knife is the one you share a last name with. And we realized that taking the knife away isn't an act of cruelty, it is an act of survival. People ask me if I feel guilty. They ask how I can sleep at night knowing my brother is sleeping on a cot in a 6x8 cell. They ask if I miss him. I tell them I don't miss him. I miss the potential of him. I miss the brother who could have been, but I do not miss the predator who lived in his skin. And as for sleep, I sleep better now than I have in 20 years. I don't jump when the phone rings. I don't check my bank account with a knot in my stomach. I don't have to watch my mother wither away in a house she can't afford to heat because her son stole her pension. Peace is expensive. It cost us a house. It cost us a trial. It cost us the illusion of a happy family. But looking at Mama Lucinda sipping her tea, watching the fireflies dance in the garden we planted together, I know the price was fair. We bought our lives back. There is a peace in this garden that feels ancient. We planted the marigolds yesterday, bright orange and yellow flowers that stand guard against the pests. Mama says marigolds protect the tomatoes. They sacrifice their scent to keep the bugs away. In a way, that is what we did. We exposed the rot to protect the harvest. I look over at the empty stone bench under the dogwood tree. The bench for the boy Kelvin used to be. It is empty, but it is not sad. It is just a monument to a memory. We can visit the memory without inviting the monster back into our lives. Mama puts her cup down on the saucer. The clink of china is sharp in the quiet air. "Booker," she says without looking at me. "Yes, Mama." "Did you lock the gate?" I smile. "It is an old habit. I locked it, Mama, and I set the alarm." "Good," she says. "Then pour me another cup and put a little extra sugar in it. I think I have earned a little sweetness." "You certainly have, Mama." I pour the tea. The amber liquid fills the cup, and I think about how fluid life is. It can change in an instant. 3 months ago, we were victims. Today, we are survivors. 3 months ago, we were being erased. Today, we are writing our own ending. Throughout this ordeal, I learned that family is a title you earn, not a right you're born with. My brother thought silence was weakness, but he forgot that the loudest storms begin with a calm drop in pressure. We often hold on to toxic relatives because of shared history, fearing the pain of letting go. But holding on to a poisonous snake just because you raised it will only get you bitten. True peace comes when you finally respect yourself enough to close the door on those who only open it to hurt you. Protect your peace. It is the most expensive thing you own. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't an easy one to tell, but I believe it was necessary. There are too many people out there suffering in silence, letting their own blood drain them dry because they are afraid to speak up. I hope my voice gives you the courage to check your own foundations. Now I have a question for you. If you were in my shoes, if you found out your sibling had stolen your spouse's cancer treatment money, would you have shown any mercy at the trial? Or did Kelvin get exactly what he deserved? I want to know what you think. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me which city or country you are listening from. I read every single comment to Mama Lucinda over breakfast, and it brings her so much joy to know she is not alone. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us share these lessons with more people who might need to hear them. And if you are feeling generous, you can support the channel with a super thanks, so I can continue to bring you more stories of truth, justice, and resilience. Take care of yourselves, lock your gates, and remember, never set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. Until next time.